I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right, guys. Happy Tuesday and welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Jessica Burbank. She is one of the hosts of The Hills Rising. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's good to be on the other side this time. Usually I'm interviewing you on Rising, so this is fun.
So, Jessica, first I want to start out with a little bit about your background in media. I think a lot of people know you from Rising, but they may not be aware of where you were before then and your path in independent media. So I just want to start off with your journey through the media space.
Yeah, it really started on TikTok. I love TikTok to this day. It's my favorite media app. But the Bernie Sanders campaign had just ended. I was never really firmly in the camp of either party in the US. I was pretty politically disengaged growing up. And then I think I slowly realized that the people in power aren't really asking the right questions, nor does anyone have solutions. And the Bernie campaign, to me, felt like an answer to a lot of political questions I had. And when it ended, it was a pandemic. We went from talking to thousands of people every day about, the most important issues facing our country to everybody's inside at home and Bernie's dropped out and it's looking like a Joe Biden presidency. So it was whiplash. And I really missed just talking to people. And so I started posting on TikTok. I made a little skit that I thought was similar to other skits I had seen talking about public spending and the lies they tell us about the deficit. And it ended up getting like 150,000 views. So I was like, oh, like this media thing is easy. I just reached way more people than I would in a phone banking session. It's really not. But I started making videos about US intervention. And TikTok took a few of those down with community guidelines violations. And Ryan Graham followed that as a story on The Intercept, the censorship we were experiencing on TikTok. And so I actually came on Rising with Ryan Grimm as the host, and he talked to us about that story he had reported on. And from there, I got scouted into being a commentator on TYT, and then did that for about a year, worked my way back around to Rising. So it all started on TikTok. TikTok's still my favorite, but I really owe a lot of, my work to Ryan Grimm, having his finger on the pulse with the political conversations online.
Interesting. What was it like, and as much as you can tell, what was it like working at TYT during that time? Because I think that a lot of people that watch this show have moved away from TYT. I think some people also started to move away this year with some of the positions that they had on LGBTQ issues. Some people weren't fond of the fact that they were also starting to interview some Republicans, although I think you should talk to people that you disagree with. But I think a lot of people that were part of that Bernie Sanders left just started to feel like, TYT was still trying to tell people to support the Democratic Party. What was it like for you?
For me, it was interesting. I had no experience with media. I didn't watch any commentators. Still to this day, I get my information from reading. And so I didn't know anything really about the network, which I think was unusual. But I was always given the directive, you can say whatever you want. We're hiring you for your honest opinion, which I really valued. That never changed. But I think what did change slowly over time was it became clear to me, which just wasn't clear at the beginning, that the extent of their radicalism or progressivism ended right at the point of supporting reimagining the prison system. They became extremely tough on crime on the main show. And there was a lot of protesting going on in Los Angeles, where the TYT studio was. And some of my good friends, Jason, became the subject of a lot of media in LA. He is a young baby. He was a protester who was trying to get Kevin DeLeon to resign after Kevin DeLeon was caught on tape calling Mike Bonin, a member of the local city council, his child a monkey, who was a Black child, saying terribly racist things about taking away, the value of the Black vote in Los Angeles. And I remember being camped out with the Black Lives Matter organizers and tuning into the TYT coverage and listening to Anna Kasparian and Cenk Uygur really just talk about Jason as if he was this out-of-control violent protester that was unjustly pursuing Kevin DeLeon. And I just remember thinking, this might not be my ideological home anymore. And I still love working with J.R. Jackson, Dr. Rashad Ritchie, John Idarola, but there was real division at the network. And it just felt like my views weren't reflected among other people's, but I never actively took a step back. I think they realized that as well when Anna Kasparian and I got into some disagreements on air about, prison reform, whether or not we can imagine a world without prisons, talking about homelessness, things of that nature. Just became obvious there was fractures, and there were fractures that I think maybe they didn't want to deal with.
Very interesting. And now you're one of the hosts for The Hills Rising. What is that dynamic like for you? Because I think one of the reasons why people like watching Rising is because you get different perspectives. So it's not we can't say that it's like a left show. We can't say it's a right wing show. We can just say that there are different voices. There are people that have different political ideologies, and you get to hear different perspectives. How do you enjoy that?
I love it. So growing up working class, that America's a mixed bag. Most everyday people don't fit cleanly into a Democratic ideological camp or a Republican one. No one's cleanly conservative or liberal. And I think the political spectrum in the US is entirely unuseful. So I really value independent thinking with a set of values. And I feel like that's what Rising offers is here's your host. They're an independent thinker. Some of them are more on the left side. Some of them are more on the right side, but they deal with the issues as they exist. They don't follow an ideology. And I think that's important. And when people listen to you, they listen to you for your values, and you're able to see how your perspective on the news shakes out against someone who might totally disagree with you. No one else in a big media network is having conversations like the ones we have on Rising. And I think it's really special that we have, both sides of an issue represented, and we have a conversation where we really flesh out the issue as a whole, not just talking in a way of here's our scripted, segment on all of the facts of what's going on, and there's limited room for conversation. We really get to see how different perspectives shake out. So I love it. I think it's great.
Especially in reference to Israel and Palestine, because there are some, independent outlets that don't want to touch that topic at all because they feel like it's very controversial. I know some people have told me that they're afraid that they'll lose subscribers if they talk about it because of their beliefs or their opinions about that particular issue. But I have noticed that Rising does cover that issue extensively. At least it has since October 7th. And it's always good to hear the different perspectives from Robbie, Debris, yourself. I enjoy hearing that. I'm curious to get your take on this particular event here, because I know you captured this on Twitter. You posted, the Capitol Police have been called to Bernie Sanders' office. It is looking increasingly like pro-Palestine protesters calling for a ceasefire now will be arrested. So I have actually never had the opportunity to go to senators or congressmen and women office in DC. First and foremost, what is this experience like? Because I know Code Pink does this often, but I have never experienced this.
These organizers were so aware. This was my first time protesting at the Capitol as well. And the organizers were very aware of how Capitol Police operates. So anyone's allowed to visit the Capitol. You go through security. We did this separately because there was a large group of us and we didn't want them to immediately kick us out before we had our voices heard. So we separated and went through different entrances and then all met up by the senator's office. We were there pretty early, 7:30. Initially, Capitol Police told us to get off of the sidewalk when we were kind of making our plan, talking about what we were there to do. And so we immediately knew that Capitol Police was onto us. We got in, they started following us around quite a bit. We knocked on the door. No one was there until like 9 a.m. Okay. And even then, at this point, I had left to actually go to the studio at Rising by the time the staff got there. But the staff was unwilling to really have a meeting with anyone. And a lot of the staff were former organizers. And so Capitol Police was, I believe, called by the staff as well. Additional police arrived and started arresting. Actually, protesters did get arrested. There's a video of my friend Catherine getting detained, shouting at the camera that's gone quite viral on TikTok. But really, it wasn't like, let's have a conversation about what you guys are here to discuss. And all of the organizers were there to have a conversation. And so they were not treated like that. And it was very clear the staff was unwilling to have one.
Why do they call the police? I could understand if the protesters were, if there was some type of vandalism or if they were being violent, but they're just there actually asking Bernie Sanders to call for a ceasefire. I've seen Code Pink protest outside Bernie Sanders' office as well. Why do they call the police? What are they afraid of?
It's a good question. I can't put myself in the imagination of those folks, especially knowing that the chief of staff of Bernie Sanders is Misty Rebeck, who was the chief of staff or the head of the state in Iowa for the Burning campaign. So a lot of the organizers that were there, myself included, actually worked for Misty. So I know Misty's very aware of how direct actions work. And I believe Capitol Police were called because they thought the organizers were interfering with their work. But they didn't want to put us through to talk to Bernie Sanders. They didn't want the organizers that were there to have a conversation about a ceasefire without Bernie being there for whatever reason. And I think we know well why, because we see on CNN Bernie Sanders talking about how he doesn't want a ceasefire, how he supports a humanitarian pause, but he doesn't really want a permanent ceasefire. And AIPAC, reposted that clip of him talking on CNN, I believe, just the next day. And so it's obvious that, to me, that they kicked us out because they didn't want to have a conversation at all.
What's your opinion of Bernie Sanders today? I mean, a lot of the people that watch the show, we are just very much tired of Bernie Sanders. I personally think that Bernie Sanders should retire. I think he's at that point now. It's like, if you're not going to, fight for us, which obviously he's not willing to do so. I feel like Bernie Sanders, he's past retirement age. I think he should just go ahead and retire and just let it be what it is. How do you feel about him, coming from like the Bernie Sanders movement and the Bernie that you see today?
Yeah, I think the Bernie Sanders that I moved to Iowa, packed up my life to work for, is not the Bernie Sanders that's in office today. And it's just sad. I really like the meme, actually, the world has progressed beyond the need of Bernie Sanders. Because at one point, he was a lone voice for a lot of issues that people care about the corporate takeover of America, about U.S. intervention abroad. Now, he's not that. And now I think a lot of people have lost hope in the electoral process as it exists at all, and for people elected to public office to be the source of change. So I'm firmly in the camp of the world has progressed beyond Bernie Sanders.
How do you feel about this issue in reference to Israel and Palestine? I feel like now we're finally starting to see squad members be more vocal and forceful about standing up for a cause that I would say Democrat leaders do not approve of, right? So Hakeem Jeffries, for example, does not approve of standing up for the Palestinian people. I feel like this is great that they're doing this, but I feel like it's a little too late, because where was this energy for Force the Vote? Like, why didn't they have this type of, pushback during that time? And I know there are many excuses that they had to censure her. I think it's hard for some people to have that sympathy, because they're like, you guys have been there for years now. And when we asked you to be vocal about other issues, for example, voting to fund the Iron Dome or voting present on the Iron Dome, you were on the wrong side of that issue as a so-called progressive. But now we see that not just the Democrat leaders, but also the Republican Party, they're coming after them for having that pro-Palestine stance. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, in my mind, are not in the same camp of like an AOC or Ayanna Pressley. AOC voting present in the vote for the Iron Dome. I mean, that famous interaction of her being whispered in the ear by Nancy Pelosi and then crying. I think it's obvious that AOC in particular, but definitely members of the squad, have been changed, right? They went in with the intent of being disruptors, a lot of them. That's what most of them said. They said, I'm an organizer. I'm going in there to change the conversation. Our ideas and our people are not being represented, and that's what we're going into Congress to do. And I really think like the day-to-day of the job changed them. They understand the world from within the halls of Congress now. And that's just not what we needed. We're no longer being represented if that's the case. I think it's easy to look in a room of members of Congress all sitting quietly, voting in the direction of the party, and think, I'm the only person in the world if I stand up and speak out against this, not knowing that there are millions of people all across the United States that wanted to vote for Medicare for all, that need universal health care, that died during the pandemic because they lost their job and then got sick from COVID and couldn't get access to health care. Like literally them being disruptive would potentially result in less deaths, in less suffering. And it's that serious. And I don't know what happens to people who lose sight of that. I don't know what causes that, but it seems to me that that's happened for a lot of members of the squad. And so listening to them give impassioned speeches today, it's necessary. They're on the right side of the issue today. But I think a lot of us want to rely on some members of Congress all of the time to be doing that and standing up for those values. And that's just like not what we've gotten from the squad. And I think that's why a lot of people have lost hope politically, is that we put so much effort into a grassroots movement that had people get elected. And we were so hopeful in 2018, only to see everyone then vote for Nancy Pelosi. I remember being so excited watching our members of Congress that we thought would represent working people get inducted and then just voting for Nancy. I remember thinking, okay, change isn't going to come from the halls of Congress.
That's right. A huge protest in D.C. over the past weekend. Over 300,000 people showed up to support Palestinian rights and their right to self-determination. I think that was a huge moment where even one of the members of the squad could have been present. And I'm sure they would have been able to be a speaker if they asked to be, right? So when I say these things, the pushback that I receive from Representative Ro Khanna, for example, is that, oh, well, if the event's on the weekend, I mean, we go home during the weekend, so we wouldn't be there. But I can point to an example like the climate protest that happened recently in New York, and some of the squad members were present and spoke at that climate march. So they can be there. I remember when they were protesting in reference to the eviction moratorium, which in my opinion, I feel was very performative, because they already had permission to do so, to have that protest. I remember activist Afeni, she actually had a conversation with AOC and Cory Bush. And what was told to her was that you guys have to organize on the outside. That's the only way you're going to push any of these politicians to do something for you in here. And so we have been doing that. We've been organizing on the outside, and like this huge protest in DC, over 300,000 people. There were celebrities at this rally. That was another opportunity that I feel like they could have been present at. I feel like it was a missed moment for them. But then I also think maybe they were told not to attend. But see, these kind of things, like when we have these movements on the outside, most of the time they're not around. And that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah, it's a huge part of the problem. And I think a part of it is they get comfortable, right? We know what the salary is. I think about how I'm kept grounded. And a lot of people in my life are working class people. I grew up with parents without college degrees. They worked hours, in small businesses. My dad was a carpenter. My mom kept books. But again, neither of them had formal training. We lived through the financial crisis and nearly lost our house. My dad still works, 9 to 5. Actually, it's oftentimes way more hours than that, doing manual labor. He's 63. This is reality for working class people. So when I talk to my family, I'm kept grounded. I think about AOC and how she grew up. She actually went to a pretty good school, not in New York City, not in the Bronx or Queens. It was one of the top schools in the country. It was majority white. I went to a really bad public school that was majority minority. And I think about all of the people from my high school that when I make a post or a video, I think no one's going to see it. It's not going to matter. And they write to me and I know it matters. I think if you lose touch with the community you're supposed to be representing, you lose your shot at representing them. I really think that's happened with the squad to varying degrees for each of the members.
I think you bring up a really good point. I think this is something that people like AOC don't really understand. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that no, she didn't really grow up in the Bronx, and she did go to a very good school in the suburbs, New York City suburb. She went to Boston University here, which is a very expensive college here in Boston. But you brought up a really good point that, like, when you come from a working class background, and that we can't really afford to just wait 20 years and hope that the right politician makes the correct decision for working class people. We couldn't afford that. I mean, like, I went to college, but I had to take out student loans, to go to college. I got little scholarships here and there, but obviously not enough to cover tuition and room and board. And I think people like her, they just don't, they say they sympathize with working class people, but I think if you really haven't lived that type of lifestyle, you don't really know what it's like. Like you mentioned, the financial crisis. A lot of people that I knew were in that situation where they either lost their house or they almost lost their house. And I think if you haven't been through that, it's hard for you to grasp like how dire the situation is for people. So when they say, be patient, we're working on some things, that was not the assignment from Justice Democrats, so to speak. The assignment was to go in and have a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party, which they did not do. And I think for me, it's just like, if you're not willing to do that, then just say that. Don't sign the pledge for Justice Democrats. Don't take on the assignment. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, I hear people, it's always, I think, like upper middle class people that I hear this from, that say we're being too critical of people like the squad, like AOC, they're standing up for good things, they're fighting for justice. I think it's underestimated how much people pick up on the energy or the vibe of someone else. And when I think about the squad, I think, like you pointed out, a lot of people who grew up working class can feel that they don't share the sense of urgency. They don't share the feeling that it's life or death, that it's eviction or keeping your home, that it's putting food on the table for your kids or not. And I think that's really what it is, that we can just feel it. And yeah, they might be able to point to quotes and speeches on the floor of Congress. They might be able to say, look at all this legislation I've put forth. But I think at the end of the day, it's as simple as we just don't feel it, that we share the same sense of urgency.
That's right. There was a conversation between yourself, Bree, and Robbie recently about Israel and Gaza. And I found that to be a really interesting discussion, because I noticed that, like, I think you and Bree were trying to move Robbie a little bit on this issue, where I feel like it came across to me that Robbie is still, I think, putting a lot of this on Hamas, and said, well, if this attack didn't happen, then we would have the situation. But I think it's really important that, like, people like you and Bree are explaining the history to him, that, and I continue to tell people this didn't start like on October 7th. Like, this started way before October 7th, going back 75 years, the occupation of the Palestinian people, the removal of the Palestinian people, and the imprisonment of the Palestinian people. And I think a lot of people just don't know that context of it. I know people that I've spoken to today, they've lost friends over this issue because they're just looking at what happened on October 7th and not what has happened, prior decades before. And I think the thing is that the Palestinian people really don't control anything. They don't control the resources. They don't control their own, freedom. They can only go from point A to point B. They can't leave Gaza whenever they want to. They have to get permission, special permission to leave the gates, to go into Israel just to get treatments at hospitals. And I think a lot of people they don't understand the full scope of that. So I think it was great that the three of you were having that conversation, but it did seem like, to me, Robbie still is focusing on, well, what happened on October 7th. And I want to get your opinion about that.
Right. Robbie represents so much of America with that viewpoint. The New York Times is reporting on the conflict, deaths since the war started, and the date is October 7th. It's not 1948. And so that there, I think, tells you that a lot of people have been propagandized to arrive at Robbie's view. That this conflict started on October 7th. No, it's been an occupation since 1948. 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homes, killed, pushed out of their neighborhoods, their homes destroyed. But even if we say, okay, let's imagine a world where things started on October 7th, you still have to honestly be extremely racist to do some kind of moral calculation and think the lives of 1,400 Israelis are somehow, more weighted in their loss than the lives of 9,000 Palestinians that have been lost, that have been killed, people who are civilians. What is the reason that those 1,400 Israeli lives are worth more than the lives of the people living in Gaza? And by the way, the hostages were in Gaza, where they were dropping 6,000 bombs, 4,000 tons of munition. Even if this conflict started on October 7th, and you view it as that rather than an occupation that's lasted 75 years, even still, you have to identify the Israeli military as a terrorist force, even if we say, okay, it started October 7th. And so at the end of the day, when I look at the blank, I think Bree tweeted something along these lines. When you look at the blank faces on people you talk to, when you describe the loss and the devastation in Gaza, some people really have been sold the propaganda and believe it, that Israel is fighting human animals, that Palestinians are less than human, and their lives actually are, in many people's view, worth less than 1,400 Israelis. And that's been really hard to deal with, that people who I've had conversations with, who I respect, view human lives differently based on ethnicity. And that's real. That's what we're dealing with here. And it's good for you to point it out. And I think that conversation was good because I don't think people are too far gone if they're at that point. I think they can realize maybe that they've been propagandized. I believe people can change. And so I hope that people agreed with Robbie at the beginning and didn't by the end of listening to that conversation.
Right. And this takes me back to what happened after September 11. I felt like there was a lot of Islamophobia in this country. And there are some people, because of September 11, they still have that belief today that all Muslim people are terrorists. Like, there are people in this country that really do believe that. And I think for me, that's why it's important for me to express to people that you don't take the actions of a select few people and use that to generalize an entire group. And you always have to ask yourself, who is in power? And the people and the Palestinians in Gaza are not in power. They have no power. They have no control. The state of Israel is. And another thing that I've often pointed out to people too, which now there is this thing to say that people are anti-Semitic if they support the Palestinian struggle. And I always have to remind people that Palestinians are Semites. If you look at the definition of Semite, they are Semites, not just Jewish people. And so this is something I always bring to people's attention. And the other issue as well is that there are also Ethiopian Jews in Israel. There are also Palestinian Jews in Israel, and they're not given the same types of rights as those who are Israeli. So I think that these are just some of the things that I think a lot of people are just not aware of. But luckily, because of platforms like Twitter and TikTok, a lot of people are finding this information, mainly more so TikTok, because TikTok has been really good about this. Facebook, not so much, because they're censoring a lot of this information, of course. Same thing with Instagram. But I think a lot of people are learning more by watching TikTok and by watching some of the videos that are on Twitter that are performed by Al Jazeera and other independent journalists that are actually over there in Gaza.
Yeah, we're able to see primary sources, people in Gaza posting, people in Palestine posting. That is, of course, when Israel hasn't shut off the internet in Gaza for a period of 34 hours. But we're able to see people post what their neighborhood looked like before and after a bombing campaign by the IDF. And I think when you see that, and when you see on the Snapchat maps, which have been super popular, people click on a place, in Israel, and then they click on somewhere in Gaza. And you can see in Israel, people are partying, they're going out to eat, they're going out on boats, they're dancing, they're having a good time. They seem safe, and moreover, they seem happy, and even moreover, they seem comfortable. And then you look in Gaza and you see rubble, you see people in dirt, you see body bags. It's just devastating. It's obvious to us when we just look that the propaganda doesn't match up with the reality that we can see with our own eyes. And so it's like telling the story and the history, but just comparing the circumstances of two people living, supposedly, Israel's a victim, Israel's an oppressor, and Hamas is this terrorist organization that attacks them constantly, rather than these are people who have been displaced and have now been herded into a territory that's the size of Manhattan, 2.3 million of them, with their electricity controlled by Israel, their borders controlled by Israel, one of them controlled by Egypt, their food, their water, all of their resources and aid. And we have such a focus on 50 hostages when this whole population of people is being held hostage, and we can see it on social media. And so I think it's good. And it means that the United States has to be better than ever at propaganda, and they've proven to not be up to the task on that. Thank God. Because, of course, the United States has a history of pushing propaganda so that people are, blinded by U.S. interventions abroad. Turns out we're not such a good guy. And I think people are able to just, say, okay, this is what we're being told in mainstream media, which people are already skeptical of. And this is what I see happening in real life.
That's right. Another thing, too, I think people have to understand the ultimate goal, because since those documents have been leaked, more people see the ultimate goal is to push the Palestinian people in Gaza into Egypt, even though Egypt said we don't have space for, 2 million people, but to push them into Egypt, seize the resources along the Gaza coast, which is oil and gas. And Israel is also bombing Lebanon and Syria as well. This is another thing that I think is missed sometimes. So the goal is to expand into that part of Gaza, also into the southern part of Lebanon, and into part of Syria, and into part of Jordan. So this is the thing I think I realize when people colonize an area, part of the colonization is to spread, not just to colonize one piece of land and then say, okay, that's it, we're all set. The goal is to spread, just like when Europeans came to North America. The goal wasn't just to let's just colonize New England. The Pilgrims weren't like, let's just colonize here and that's it. No, the goal was to colonize the entire, part of North America. And then as you saw, as time went by, the indigenous people were either murdered or they were pushed onto reservations. And that's part of the reason why we have such a small indigenous population in this country. So I try to compare it to people so they can see it from the American perspective and they can understand what's actually happening over there as well. But I have noticed that even mainstream media, and I think it's because of the protest, even mainstream media is now having to discuss what has happened to the Palestinian people and also the history. And that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeing Piers Morgan have these tough conversations. He does this interview with Bassem Youssef, gets completely blindsided with how Bassem Youssef was able to combat Piers Morgan's moral grandstanding, honestly, with just like dark, sarcastic humor. It was brilliant. And then because it got so many views, Piers Morgan has another conversation, a sit down one longer with Bassem Youssef. And it seems like he got through to him, because now you see Piers Morgan reporting a lot on what's happening in Gaza and asking tough questions. And so it just goes to show how powerful information is, especially when it's delivered from someone who's very talented like Bassem Youssef, who makes it terribly funny. But I saw on TikTok this video from a younger girl who I guess father is a professor or what have you. And she was talking about, the Suez Canal. And I loved that I saw a young person talking about this. I taught a class with Stephen Kinzer when I was a graduate student on the history of U.S. intervention. And everything that's happening in Israel right now so much mirrors what happened in Panama. When the U.S. wanted control over the Panama Canal and to build a canal there, we obviously lost our control over the Suez Canal, the West did, when, President Nasser decided to take it away from French and British ownership. And still to this day, the United States is very interested in building an alternate canal through Israel that would pass directly through where Gaza is today. They call this the Gurion Canal after the first prime minister of Israel. And there's U.S. Department of Energy documents where they have a consultant outlining precisely how they could use nuclear bombs to create a canal from the Agab Gulf all the way through the Mediterranean as an alternate to the Suez Canal, and would be controlled by Israel. And they assess how much money this would cost, what the return on investment would be. And it matches so well with the plan that just leaked from Israel. It's insane. It's very obvious that they've made the moral and economic calculation that this war in the Middle East is worth the US and Israel permanently controlling a very useful canal that would make up to $8 billion annually for them. And it's insane because it mirrors exactly the intervention we had in Panama, how we decided to create a country there and then stay in war in Panama 75 years later, and ensure that the US has control over the Panamanian government. It's absolutely insane how much this is not just the same playbook, but the same exact place.
The other issue, too, is that the U.S. government has over 800 bases around the world. And I just want Americans to think about this for a second. How would everyone feel if, let's say, China, Russia, Germany, well, Germany's an ally. So let's do China, Russia, and let's say Brazil. How would you guys feel if they had bases surrounding the United States? How would you feel? Like, it's really bizarre when you think about it. And this is why I say the U.S. government tries to police the world, whether it's the bases that they have all over the globe, or if it's the intervention that the U.S. government does, the regime changes, the imperialism. It's as if, going back to that Wolfowitz doctrine, which basically says that no other power is allowed to surpass the United States government. And that's a very scary thing when you think about it. And it makes me think more about why the US government is trying to provoke China, why they have the tension and the disagreement that they do with Russia. And this is not to say that those countries are perfect. They have their faults. But a lot of this has to deal with the economy, I think.
Right. Yeah. It's all about U.S. hegemony. I love that the speech was resurfaced of Biden in 1986, talking about how $3 billion is such a great investment. It's the best investment we could make. We're getting a great deal because if there wasn't an Israel, we would have to create one to protect our interests in the region. So not only is the canal something that's been attractive to us for quite some time, it's the fact that there's $524 billion worth of oil and natural gas in the Levant Basin as well. Of course, the US would intervene for oil and gas if it was just that alone. We couped the leader of Iran in the 1950s in 1951, 2, and 3. Mohammad Mossadegh was democratically elected and then decided to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian oil company, said, you know what, Britain, this actually isn't your oil. You have no business taking it. And then in response, John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles, who were corporate lawyers, they were members of the elite class. They represented the Henry J. Schroeder Banking Corporation, to which the Anglo-Iranian oil company was their major client. They knew all of these guys. They were their friends. So when the Iranian president says we're going to nationalize this oil company, what do? We coup him. We take him out of power and we reinstate the Shah and establish a monarchy in Iran. That's why people in Iran today shout death to America. We took away their democracy. We destabilized their country. And then the Anglo-Iranian oil company became British Petroleum, commonly known as BP. It's like very obvious that the United States conducts foreign and military policy and covert operations in the direction of securing more capital, not for the benefit of everyday working people in the United States, or even the soldiers that fight for them and carry out these interventions, but just for the elite class in the US. I think that needs to be pointed out as well. Everyday Americans don't support their government doing this. They're doing it for themselves.
That's right. And I'm curious to get your opinion about the 2024 presidential election, because right now, from what I've seen, I feel like the U.S. government is trying to use this war with Israel and Gaza as an excuse to start, war with Iran. And I think they've been trying to do this for quite some time. What do you think is going to happen in 2024, given that Joe Biden's polling numbers are abysmal, given that there are third party and independent candidates that are running that are actually getting more attention from mainstream media than I've seen before in the past when other third party and independent candidates have run? What is your prediction for 2024?
Yeah, I really see a field where the independent lane is wide open. I don't even see it as an RFK Jr. Trump Biden race. I think another candidate could enter, other than Cornel West, honestly. From I guess it would be a fifth party at that point. I can see the field becoming incredibly crowded. I don't see the Democratic Party overcoming their delusions that Biden can run again and win. I really don't. I think that the people that are so close to Biden are just yes men, and the people running the Democratic Party would rather take their chances with a candidate nearly guaranteed to lose by the polling right now than actually work with someone who might disagree with them on some issues. It's that extreme within the Democratic Party, and they'll do anything. And the Supreme Court and the laws have backed them up. They've said, you know what, it's party business. No election laws go. Pick whatever candidate you want by hand, even if someone else has the popular vote from within your party. They don't care. And so I really see Biden being the candidate for the Democrats, but I do see the possibility of Marianne to do extremely well. She's polling above 10% in a lot of the polls. I could see her pulling away some of the vote from Biden. I don't see an insurgent winning in the Democratic Party, but I do see the potential for an RFK Jr. to win. I do see the potential for Cornel West to get a large plurality of the vote. I think the Green Party needs a little bit more electoral structure, but they have more than any other third party in the United States. They really get people on the ballot. And so it's going to be really interesting. I don't think it's going to be a typical election, though. I don't think it's going to be Republican, Democrat. I don't think it's going to be Trump, Biden. I think it's going to be at least 4 major candidates.
Yeah, for people who are not aware, I just saw a poll earlier today that shows that Marianne Williamson is now polling at like 13%.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this Israel Gaza issue has definitely given her a bump. So anything could happen, you guys. You never know. And the Green Party still has to announce a candidate. They have to run someone for president. That's the rules. Like, you have to have a presidential candidate in order to remain a political party in the United States. So they have to run someone. So we'll have to wait and see who that individual is going to be. But I think that next year is going to be very interesting. I think the Democrats are crazy if they think that they have this in the bag. I don't think they do. I've heard conversations of Kamala Harris should be pushed forward. I think that's also a mistake. I think they're joking about like saying that she's popular now. I don't think that Kamala Harris is popular. I remember she struggled. She couldn't even get a delegate from her own state of California when she ran in 2020. It's going to be crazy. I think 2024 will also at the same time be very exciting, because I feel like now people who wanted a third party choice or an independent choice, I feel like they're going to have more options this time around.
Yeah. And it's going to be funny. We have DeSantis running around in heels. We have Vivek Ramaswamy, who's an iPad kid running for president. We have a lot of characters. There's a lot of people that are going to make it funny. But when you think about the fate of the nation, it does not become so funny. But for a brief moment, we can laugh. So I'm excited for the debates.
Awesome. All right, Jessica, one more question for you. I saw on Twitter that it looks like you are starting a YouTube channel. So I want to hear a little bit about that.
Yes, I did talk a little bit about Panama because it's been on my mind. I posted a video on the real deep state. I mentioned TikTok getting taken down, or my early TikToks taken down, because I was talking about U.S. intervention and reviewing CIA documents. So I think I'm going to do a series just on the real deep state, so the CIA and covert operations and how it relates to what's happening in the news today. But that's on YouTube, on my channel, Burbank. And then I do weekly news on TikTok too. So if you want more of my stuff, that's where to find it.
Awesome. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
All right, guys. Awesome to talk to Jessica on this end. I know it's different, like when you're on the other side. Like, I always feel like it's different for me. Like when I'm actually the one that's being interviewed, I'm just like, oh, it feels different. It just feels different every time. All right, guys, we do have more news stories that we're going to get into tonight. But first and foremost, I do want to make sure I shout out Sabby patrons. You guys are doing the damn thing out here. Thank you so much for your support. Oh, did I click on the wrong thing? Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you, guys. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: ultimate, Sabinators, Sabsters. Don't forget about those Sabbies. They're the meat of the sandwich, your cold cuts. And of course, members. Members are the cheese. Thank you guys so much for your support. And I believe I shouted out Lilia Beck as a new Sabby patron last time. So thank you guys so much. Okay, we do have quite a bit to discuss tonight. We're also going to do call-in tonight. So don't miss that. I'm pretty sure you're going to want to chat on call-in after we go through these stories tonight. So let's go ahead and dive into that thumbnail. So here we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what else are we discussing tonight? Tonight, we're discussing RFK Jr. censorship upset. We're going to get into that story. If you have not heard about that, hold on to your seats for that one because that is a doozy. That is a doozy. We're also going to discuss Bernie Sanders hurts fans. So Bernie has upset some of his most loyal supporters who actually still were fighting for Bernie or believed in Bernie. I think a lot of us knew the direction that Bernie was heading in, but the cringe comments that have come from Bernie Sanders as of recent in reference to this issue with Israel and Palestine, we're going to get into that story. We're also going to dive into, oh boy, Clyburn, Cory Booker, and that young woman there is Jasmine Crockett. You may not be familiar with her. She is newer member of Congress. She has really stirred people up with some of her comments. So we're going to talk about what I would like to call the Black misleadership class that we have in DC. We're going to talk about them and why I think more people are moving away from them and the statements that they're making. We're going to get into all that. And we're also going to discuss, Jessica was already here. So you guys already met Jessica Burbank. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. So we're going to get into this story about Jim Clyburn, Cory Booker, and Jasmine Crockett. So these three individuals did not have a good week because they have said some things that have really rubbed people the wrong way, whether it was in reference to Israel and Palestine, or whether it is in reference to people not wanting to vote for Joe Biden. And I think this is really important for people to hear, because oftentimes we talk about what it's like to have representation. But just because you have representation, that doesn't mean those people are actually representing you the way that they should. And with these three individuals, that is definitely the case. You have to understand where Jim Clyburn comes from, what he is doing. You have to understand where Jasmine comes from and what she is doing. And you have to understand where Cory Booker comes from and what he is doing. So first and foremost, we're going to get started with this interview from Jasmine Crockett, where apparently she doesn't seem to think that Black voters are intelligent enough to realize how Congress works and what we have received from Joe Biden. And this did not go well for Jasmine. A lot of people did not like this video. Let's dive right in.
Here's the deal. Perception is reality. And so when you look at the data that was provided in this poll, it talks about how people feel. And when people decide whether they're going to the poll or whether they're not going to the poll, it's all about how you feel in that moment. And so while the facts may not align with their feelings are dictating their reality. Their reality is that they said that they feel better or they felt better when Trump was in office. But we've been trying to push back. We've got some very popular African-American artists that are out here.
Let's just pause right here before we get to the rest of it, before she gets into the African-American artists. I want you to notice what she's doing here. Listen to this.
Their reality is that they said that they feel better or they felt better when Trump was in office. But we've been trying to push back. We've got some very...
Pause. That part right there. She said the reality is people are telling the Democrats that they actually felt better when Trump was in office. Now, when people are saying that, it's mainly about economic issues. Economically, a lot of you were doing better under Trump's presidency than you are now under Joe Biden's presidency. And there are different reasons for that. Inflation, obviously, We have 2 international conflicts abroad. Let's not forget about that. The housing crisis has increased. So the homelessness rate has increased. So a lot of that focus is on the economic issues. But did you notice what she just did? After hearing voters tell her that they were doing better under Donald Trump, again, this is economically, her response is, we have been trying to push back on that. How do you push back on someone's feelings? How do you push back on someone's economic situation? How do you if somebody looks at their bank account and they see that obviously there have been some issues this year, last year, under this presidency versus under Donald Trump's presidency, how do you push back on that? Unless you're telling them that they're not telling the truth. So essentially, she thinks that people are not being honest about their economic situation. Let's continue. She hasn't even got to the cringe part yet.
Popular African-American artists that are out here saying things like, oh, I got checks when Trump was in office. I want those checks again, not understanding that that really came from Congress.
Pause. This piece right here. So the checks that she's referring to are those stimulus checks, right? Like we did get more money under Donald Trump than we did under Joe Biden. And she goes on to say that those checks come from Congress and people don't understand that. Let's take that point. Congress passes the legislation, the checks come from Congress. Then why is it that under Joe Biden's presidency, when Joe Biden had the House, okay, the Democrats had the House. They don't anymore, but they did. See, Joe Biden did the same thing as Obama. When Obama first entered the House, remember Obama had Democrat House. Some people say a Democrat Senate, if you count Lieberman, but technically he had 2 years to work with that Dem majority. Joe Biden had 2 years to work with that Dem majority. So when she tells you, not realizing that Congress actually are the ones that put those checks through, then the question that you should come back to Jasmine with is, then why is it that the Democrats who had the majority in the House, and you can also say they were split even in the Senate, why is it that they didn't push those things through? Why does that stimulus check from Joe Biden, which he promised people $2,000, why didn't that go through? That's all on Joe Biden. That's not because of Congress. He was the one who changed the amount after the fact and said, well, you already got that extra portion from Donald Trump. That was not the way he sold that to the American people, particularly the voters in Georgia, where he said, if you put Warnock and Ossoff into office, I'll make sure you get those $2,000 checks. That was all on Joe Biden misleading the American people. Congress had nothing to do with that. So let's just remove that one from the table. But listen to what she said. Why did Joe Biden work with that dim majority that he had the first 2 years that he was in office? Obama played this game. This is what they do. And I told you this would happen. They would lose the House. I was wrong about the red wave, but I was right about them losing the House. They would lose the House, and then they would use the excuse that they could not get those things done because Republicans had the majority in the House. Obama did the same thing. Now, this is where she really plucks people's nerves.
Understanding that really came from Congress. So we've got a couple of things, the perception issue, and then we also have an issue as it relates to civics in this country and people not understanding exactly how any of this works. Here's the deal.
So here's Jasmine Sullivan basically explaining that particularly Black voters don't understand how civics works. Jasmine is a lawyer, by the way. Just keep that in mind. She's a lawyer. You see, this is what RBN means when we talk about the Black Miss Leadership class. That was a cringe thing to say. Whether she was right about the first part about people making their decision when they get in line to vote and yada, yada, that just kind of lost all perspective when she started to discuss how Black people are not intelligent enough basically to understand how these things work. Well, let me tell you something, Jasmine. Here's something that everybody understands in this country, and that's their bank account. And they don't have to be a lawyer to look at their bank account and to see that something isn't right. They don't have to be a lawyer to walk into the grocery store and to realize that these grocery prices are a lot higher than they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So this statement from Jasmine did not go over well on Twitter. People were really not feeling what she said. I'm telling you. Look at the comments. Let me put this up here. I am Richie Eyes says these type of Black people have been in the way far too long. Dr. Deborah Jenkins. So I suppose she's going to educate us. Now, I tried to look up Jasmine's funding to see who her donors were, but her information isn't posted yet on Open Secrets because she's new. She's just a newbie in Congress. But even when she was running for office, I said, this woman, again, is another one pretending to be progressive, running on, don't you want another Black person in Congress? And I knew she would be just like all the others that we already have there, the Black Miss Leadership class. So here we go. We got someone from Congress, a Democrat, who apparently doesn't think that Black voters, you see that look on her face? Apparently doesn't think that Black voters are intelligent enough to know what we're doing. I'll let you know when the funding is posted. So that's Jasmine. Watch out for her, because she's going to be one of those ones that, again, she'll follow in the footsteps of a Maxine Waters, another one who pretended to be like she was progressive or whatever. She'll follow in those footsteps. They don't represent us. This is the thing I want people to understand. They don't represent us. This is the illusion of representation, to make us think that we have someone in there fighting for us, but we really don't. How can you sit there, Jasmine, and tell people after everything that has happened over the past 3 years that the American people should just shut up, basically, and support Joe Biden anyway, especially Black voters, because we're not intelligent enough to understand how civics works? Black Miss Leadership class. Then we go on to Cory Booker. Cory Booker also not having a good week. Cory Booker was given a speech in New Jersey and was confronted by protesters. Let's go ahead and get into this one. This is funny. Tariq shared this. He said, breaking, Cory Booker's speech in New Jersey was just shut down by protesters who interrupted him after a few seconds, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza, where a Palestinian child is being killed every 10 minutes. Booker was taken by surprise and had to exit immediately. I'm going to play this, and then there's some things I got to tell you about Cory Booker, because I actually did meet Cory Booker. So listen to this.
I want to call out to everybody right now. These final hours, this is what's on the ballot. We should know in New Jersey how privileged we are. There are so many places in our country right now where people want to make sure that we have. This is what makes America great.
So what's happening right now is there are protesters in the crowd, and they're holding up their hands and to show blood on their hands, and they're saying ceasefire now. Now, listen to what Cory Booker says. He's so fake.
This is what makes America great. The power to protest. The power to have free speech. The power of America.
So you see what let me show you what he does. Watch this. So obviously he wasn't expecting this to happen.
The power to protest. The power to have free speech.
So there's Cory Booker saying, this is what makes America great. The power to protest, the power to have free speech. Cory Booker is incredibly fake, incredibly fake. And I'm pretty sure, you know, you see his eyes are like, this is what makes America great. Very fake. I met Cory Booker when he was running for president in 2020. And even during the speech that he gave in New Hampshire, he was very fake. So at that time, I had a goal to go to every rally in New Hampshire. I didn't make it to half of them because of winter storms, but I made it. That was one of the ones I made it to. There was a gentleman in the crowd that said, you know what? You remind me a lot of Barack Obama. When he came here, he said all the things that you're saying right now. And then we voted for him. He got into the White House and he abandoned the working class people. Now, how can I still remember that? I still remember what that guy said till this day, because when he said that, the entire room became silent. No one argued against that guy. No one told him to be quiet. Cory Booker kind of just froze. And I'll get into something else about that statement from that guy in just a second. But watch this.
The power of America.
I have to mute it because of the music, but you'll see there he is right there.
Column A, all the way. Column A, all the way. Column A, all the way. I want to call.
So that's Cory Booker. Eric said low rent Obama. I don't know what to say, but there's Cory Booker there. So apparently he ended up exiting because of the protesters there. Now, let me tell you something about Cory Booker. When that gentleman said, you remind me of Barack Obama, let me point out a couple of things. Cory Booker went to an Ivy League university like Barack Obama. Cory Booker has his sob story of what it was like growing up Black in America like Barack Obama. Cory Booker tells that same story all the time. My family tried to buy a house and that we get it. We get it. We get it. Cory Booker, like Barack Obama, moved into the inner city to supposedly help out people in the inner city. For a lot of people who don't know, that's what Cory Booker did. He moved into Newark, New Jersey with the goal. At that time, I believe he was running for mayor, and his goal was to help the lower class people. And he lived there with them, lived in the building. This is why some people thought he was legit, because he didn't live in like some high-rise apartment. He lived in that community in the same building as a lot of the people that he was trying to help. So we've seen this before. We've seen the Ivy League politician, the Black Ivy League politician that moves into the hood and says they're trying to help out the lower income people. And we've also seen those politicians sell out to Wall Street, the military industrial complex, and honestly, sell out the Black community. I don't understand why Cory Booker is still being elected, why people still vote for him. Cory Booker, someone who said he fought so much for criminal justice, was one of the first people to stand up and cheer when the Democratic Party under Joe Biden agreed to fund the police more. These people are frauds. This is exactly what the donorship class wants. They want someone like a Cory Booker or a Barack Obama, someone who's Black, highly educated, went to an Ivy League school, but then they move into these lower income neighborhoods to convince the poor folk that they actually really do care about those people and their needs. And then the moment when they get their calling, and they all do, they go off to DC and they forget about those people. They take the money from big donors and they start a career in politics. This is actually a smart scheme by the donor class, because now you have the representation. Yes, they went to an Ivy League school, but they're living in the lower income community like you are. So you believe it. Cory Booker also failing on this issue in reference to Israel and Palestine. The activists are not with Cory Booker. Look at this. Indigenous activists are now blocking the weapons shipment to Israel from leaving the Tacoma port from the water. The boat is still unable to leave the port. So this happened in Washington State. Look at this video. So these are the activists.
Free Palestine. Woo, we out here.
So Breakthrough News caught this. These are the activists. We saw activists block one of the ports in Oakland, California. These activists are blocking a port in Tacoma, Washington. So this is the thing, like Cory Booker, they're not with you. And of course, people are saying, amazing. Not all heroes wear capes. Heroes, you will be remembered. So huge, because it says the boat was still unable to leave the port, similar to what happened in Oakland, California as well. And it's not just that particular action. Boeing, after shutting down Boeing Defense Building 598 for 2 hours, workers are being sent home and deliveries for the day have been canceled. Congress won't stop the bombs, so we will. And here are the activists here outside of Boeing.
How many kids have you killed today? Boeing, Boeing, what do you say? Boeing, Boeing, what do you say? How many kids have you killed today? How many kids have you killed today? How many kids have you killed today?
And you notice, like, it's not even like a lot of people, but it was enough to disrupt production and shipment for Boeing. So, and Cory Booker knows this. The people, particularly the younger people, they're not with you on this issue. Not with you on this issue. Now, there's more. So we talked about Jasmine and we talked about Cory. Now we need to get into Jim Clyburn. Jim Clyburn, who lives in one of the poorest districts in South Carolina, but Jim's not poor, right? Jim Clyburn, for years, has continued to sell out the Black community. For years. For years. Now, he's in this interview that I'm going to show you. Now, he claims that he doesn't understand why Joe Biden has the poll numbers that he has. I'll explain to you why he does not understand. So shout out to Case Study QB for this. Representative Jim Clyburn asked about the decrease in Black voters' approval in the latest polls in South Carolina. So this is important. This is in his state. And why is this important, guys? Because the Democratic Party decided to make South Carolina the first primary state for early voting instead of Iowa. This may be starting to backfire. Listen to this.
Let's talk about voters in South Carolina, your constituents there, and the comparison from 2020, the exit polls that we have, versus the latest polling on the job approval. There's a pretty big disparity there. Exit polls show In 2020, President Biden won 90% of black votes in South Carolina. His job approval in a CNN poll out this week is now at 63%.
Look at those numbers, guys. The numbers don't lie. 2020 exit polls, black support for President Biden in South Carolina, 90%. Now, 63%. I didn't make up these numbers. I went to college in South Carolina. I have some family members in South Carolina, and I can tell you this is not good, not just for Joe Biden, but also for Jim Clyburn, because this makes Jim look bad. Because Jim Clyburn was the one who told voters in South Carolina that Joe has your back, so you need to have his back. We're going to go out there and we're going to vote for Joe Biden. So Clyburn has some things to answer for. Let's continue.
Among black voters. I don't know that anybody expects him to win the state in the general, but what's your assessment of this drop off in approval or support for the president among black voters?
Well, you know, Victor, I have been puzzled by all of this polling because I do a lot of polling. You mentioned Mississippi earlier. I spent the weekend before last 2, maybe 3 days in Mississippi. I've been in other states as well.
He's troubled by the polling because the polling doesn't reflect what he wants to see, because the polling isn't positive for Joe Biden. But he's not troubled by the polling when the polling is positive for Joe Biden. So think about that for a second and look at these numbers. Approve of Biden's job as president. 63% black voters, 24% white voters. Listen to the rest. So we talked about Mississippi. Unfortunately, this is not about Mississippi, Clyburn. This is about your home state of South Carolina.
2, maybe 3 days in Mississippi. I've been in other states as well. On my way to Virginia on Sunday, tomorrow, or Monday. And I'm not getting that. I go throughout South Carolina all the time. Last weekend, I was in Charleston, in Columbia, in Orangeburg. I'm not getting that. So
Pause. Let me explain to you why he's not getting that. There's one or two things. One, he's either lying, because I've seen videos of black residents of South Carolina confronting Jim Clyburn about Joe Biden's position. I played them on this show. Or 2, he's talking to the wrong people. You see, Jim Clyburn, he's not even like one of the most popular congressmen in DC, but he's popular in South Carolina. So what people have to understand is that Jim Clyburn not only has a hold within certain black communities, but in particular, the black church and the black fraternities. Those are the people that he's talking to. Jim Clyburn, for the most part, is talking to people that are like him, the black bourgeoisie. He's not talking to working class black people. He's not talking to poor black people. And he's not talking to young black people. And when young black people have approached him about how they're not doing well economically, he shouted them down and said, "Get out of here with that foolishness." I played the video on the show. He's not talking to those people. He's talking to the people that already agree with him. That's part of the problem. And you have to understand the reason why someone like Jim Clyburn continues to get elected, even though he's in one of the poorest districts in South Carolina, is because of those 2 categories I just told you about, the black church and the black fraternities. Jim Clyburn has probably every black pastor in South Carolina. He probably has their numbers. He probably has some type of relationship with them, whether it's on a business basis or some type of philanthropy basis. Like, he has those people on speed dial. Same thing with the fraternal organizations. And this is really who he relies on to come through, not just for him, but for the Democratic Party. Thank you, Ashura. Yes. Sabby Sabs, he's definitely, if not Boule adjacent. Yes. These are the people that he likes to congregate with. He's not talking to the black people that are working 2 jobs. Is he talking to black people that have to do a shift at McDonald's in the morning and then another shift at the grocery store in the evening? Is he talking to those people? No. He's talking to bougie black people, particularly in those 2 groups that I just told you about. Let's continue.
I don't know what's going on with this polling, but I guarantee you.
What are you getting?
I'm getting that African Americans are very pleased with this president and what he has done. We know how we are connecting every home and every business in South Carolina to the internet. We know that it's because of this infrastructure bill that he did. We know that seniors are now paying much less for their medicine, most especially for the negotiations going on with Medicare, the cap with $35 a month for insulin. We know.
Let me pause for a second. The 2 examples that he just gave, bad examples. He's talking about the benefit that seniors received in reference to, Medicare, the Medicare legislation that Joe Biden passed. Here's the problem with that. That only benefits seniors. Last time I checked, it's not just seniors in South Carolina. So that's 1. 2, he mentions infrastructure bill. He's like, well, we know that black people in South Carolina are now connected to the internet. What does that matter if you can't put food on the table? Do you see the problem? Do you guys know there are parts of South Carolina? Because when I went to college, South Carolina, University of South Carolina is in Columbia. So Columbia is kind of what they refer to as the city, even though it's suburban, whatever. Anywho, do you know that there are parts of South Carolina, like rural South Carolina, that you go to and like there's barely any internet? People live there. Barely any internet. We're talking about people need broadband. There's towns that don't have grocery stores, so you have food deserts. Now, what's more important, food? Let me let him continue. Terrible, terrible take.
For their medicine, most especially for the negotiations going on with Medicare, the cap with $35 a month for insulin. We know who is responsible for all of that.
Well, Congressman,
and so
let me just jump in here because one more thing I want to bring to you. And, nobody's going to challenge your connection to the people of South Carolina and Mississippi as you're going over there to help the Democratic candidate run for governor. But we've got a scientific poll that shows that there's been this drop off. And also our John King was in Milwaukee this week speaking with black voters there. I want you to listen to what they say, as of course we know Wisconsin is crucial if the president is to be reelected.
Black people in general, I think, tend to be pretty loyal to the Democratic Party. And sometimes I wonder, just based on how that party has performed thus far for people of color, if we should continue to be.
If you're Joe Biden, then you want to be reelected. He'd have a problem today, right?
Yes, he would. He'll have a big problem.
If it were just Biden and Trump, who would you vote for?
That's just a tough one.
So hearing that, is your suggestion that the president does not need to change what he's doing if you have these black voters who seem to be underwhelmed?
I don't think the president needs to change what he's doing. I think that those of us who are helping to run this campaign need to change what we're doing.
So you see that right there? Jim Clyburn doesn't think that Joe Biden needs to change what he's doing. People are hurting in this country financially, economically. People are struggling. But Jim Clyburn doesn't think that Joe Biden needs to change anything that he's doing. This is the same guy who would sit here and tell you that he's progressive. He's a member of the Progressive Caucus. He's a member of the Black Caucus. He's a part of the Black misleadership class. Don't push for nothing no more. Just because let me make something very clear, Jim. Just because you may have participated in a couple of marches back in the day doesn't mean that you still hold those values today, especially now that you got money. And we're going to get into some of the money, some of the donor money that Jim Clyburn has. That don't mean anything today. You're comfortable now, Jim. Now he's all about himself and collecting that bag. Joe Biden doesn't need to do anything. Jim Clyburn is going to sit here and say what he needs to say to keep the positions that he has in Congress, and so that no super PACs come up against him to try to push him out of his seat. That's how this works. Yes, Denise, just like John Lewis. Just because and I got to be clear, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but just because you participated in a couple of marches back in the day, if you not still fighting that fight now, and I ain't got to say you don't always have to march. Some people physically can't do it. But if you're not still fighting for oppressed people now, and you sold out to Wall Street and the military industrial complex and big pharma, you don't get to brag about that anymore. That's just how it is. Jim Clyburn has been counting on Black boomers to continue to support the Democratic Party. But here's what's happening. Eventually, Black boomers are no longer boomers. Eventually, people do die. And then you have the younger people. You have Gen X. You have millennials. You have Gen Z. What about everybody else? What about the rest of all those groups who are not with you, not in agreement with you? The Democratic Party is not ready for this change. The Democratic Party is not ready for these other generations coming through because they're not buying this mess. Let me let them finish here.
That's what the problem is. We are not making these connections. You cannot ask for a more productive presidency than Joe Biden has had. You can go through all of the bills that he's passed. Nothing has come close to it since the Great Society programs of Lyndon Baines Johnson. So
it's the voters' fault for not understanding. Again, this goes back to what Jasmine was saying. It's the voters' fault. They just don't understand. They're not smart enough. They're not smart enough. And let's talk about Lyndon B. Let me let him finish. Hold on. Because we're going to get to something in a second.
These passed. Nothing has come close to it since the Great Society programs of Lyndon Baines Johnson. So the question is, how do we get people to understand it and to feel it? That's the problem. It's not Joe Biden's problem. It is our problem. Those of us who must get this message out and get him connected to the voters. That's the problem, not the president.
All right.
Him and Jasmine, they don't think that the American people, particularly Black voters, because that's what this conversation is about in this interview, are intelligent enough to understand what's happening in their bank account, what's happening with their wallet. He's another one that needs to retire, Jim Clyburn. He's there to maintain the status quo. Now, I want to go to this video here. This is Caitlin Collins, because I want to give you a different perspective on this, and then we're going to get back into Jim Clyburn's money in a minute. In this particular interview with Max Boot and Caitlin Collins, they talk about the recent pro-Palestinian protests outside the White House. Listen to this. This is why I'm trying to tell you the Democratic Party is not on the same page with the younger generations. And they can continue to say that young people don't really show up to vote like that, but the young people don't remain to be young people. People do age. And they're not on the same page with what these groups want and need in this country. Listen to this. This is what Clyburn doesn't seem to understand.
The effects of this are being felt in Washington. I mean, the pressure on the administration to figure out something here is growing. They're facing all these calls from world leaders to find a way to get a ceasefire, humanitarian pause, tactical pause, whatever you want to call it. I mean, look at over the weekend, you can see these pictures that happened. There were protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters outside the White House. This is paint, I should note, but this is something that they were removing from outside the White House today as all of these protesters were there, making very clear their feelings on this with this red graffiti. I covered the White House for several years. There were always protesters out there. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this, though.
Yeah, and I think it actually may relate to your previous segment because you were talking about why is President Biden looking suddenly weak against Trump? And part of it is he's lost support among young voters. And I think part of that may be attributed to this, the fact that a lot of younger progressives are more pro-Palestinian rather than pro-Israel. And so Biden is getting a lot of blowback from his own party for basically standing with Israel. And so you're seeing the political pressures at home as well as in the region.
Yeah, and Muslim Americans, obviously not a monolith, but we've heard from several of them saying if there is no ceasefire, they're not going to vote for Biden. Max Boot, great perspective. Thank you for your time tonight.
Joe Biden is losing not just black voters, but young voters. And some people may say, well, did young voters actually support Joe Biden? They definitely did in Georgia. We know that from the data. How you lose after Donald Trump? How do you lose support from black voters and the younger voters? Going into 2024, it does not look good for Joe Biden. Now, things can always change, but I don't know this time around. And this is no one's fault but Joe Biden. We can say this to Jim Clyburn. This is not the voters' fault. It's not the volunteers that work for the campaigns. It's not their fault. This is all Joe Biden's fault. This is what happens when you do not meet the needs of the American people. And eventually, black voters sit back and they watch every other group get some type of concession with their vote. So eventually black voters are going to say, wait a minute, you need to give us something too. What has Joe Biden done for the black community since he's been in office? They didn't pass the voters' rights bill. He decided to give the police more money. For all the activists that are calling for reparations, that's not happening under Joe Biden. Joe Biden won't decriminalize marijuana on a federal level. They didn't increase the minimum wage. How is it 2023? And the federal minimum wage is still what, $7.25 an hour? What has he done? Now, I want you to hear something, because I think Teslin Figaro had a really interesting point about what is really happening with Joe Biden. And this is something I think Jim Clyburn needs to hear. He probably already knows this anyway, but I want you to hear this. She was on Fox News. Now, Teslin, she's a part of the Breakfast Club. If you guys watch the Breakfast Club, sometimes she's on there. She's not on there every time, but sometimes she's like a guest host on the Breakfast Club. She had a really good, solid point here about Joe Biden that is going to wake a lot of people up. Hopefully, I hope this video of her goes viral, because people need to hear what she's saying, why Joe Biden is doing bad. Listen to this.
Let's bring in Teslin Figaro. She's a former advisor for Bernie Sanders and host of the Straight Shot No Chaser podcast. So how dangerous a position politically is Joe Biden with Democrats?
Yeah, let's be clear. Anytime David Axelrod, who is a known kingmaker in the Democrat Party, is saying the quiet part out loud, there is a problem. Jesse, people have been talking about this behind the scenes for months and years. In fact, I want to remind people that in 2019, it was Joe Biden that signaled to the American people and to Democrats that he would be a one-term president. People forget that. His whole thing was about running one time and being able to be a placeholder for Trump. So what happened is this coalition has been falling off way before this war. Progressives were begged to vote for Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders sat there and said that he would be the most progressive president in our history, which everyone knew was a joke. People said literally held their nose to vote for Joe Biden. Black voters are falling off. Now you have the Muslim and Arab community that is falling off, that is clearly saying we will go against you, which you need Michigan to win, by the way. You have working class voters all over this country. 500,000 people are on strike right now, from nurses, from auto workers, from teachers, from casino workers. That literally says there is a problem. And
let's just pause there for a second, because she goes, spits fire. Let's just pause there just for a second. That part right there, which I think some people did forget about, what Teslin said about Joe Biden saying that he was just going to be a one-term president. How many of you forgot about that? Joe Biden was not in this for the long haul. Joe Biden just basically was to come in and like, look, let me come on in here, do this thing so that Trump doesn't get reelected, and then you guys kind of take it from there. Now, where's the problem? Problem is, they have not really been prepping anybody to come up in after that. You can't tell me they're prepping Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris can't get through an interview without saying something ridiculous or stupid. So you can't tell me that's who they must have been prepping. You cannot tell me that. You can't. Some people say Pete Buttigieg. Really? The same guy who did not, went over well with black voters? That guy? Some people say Gavin Newsom. I don't know. Gavin Newsom isn't doing California too well. That guy? Who's next? Who's left? Let's continue. But this is what happens again. This is what happens when you push a candidate that the American people didn't want. Joe Biden was not the most popular Democrat candidate in the 2020 Democrat primary. It was very obvious that Bernie Sanders was. And the DNC and Bernie Sanders himself did everything that they could possible to make it so that it would not be the most popular candidate, that it would be Joe Biden because he's status quo. So this is what we're stuck with. We are stuck with the candidate that did not have a solid base, didn't have a passionate base. Say what you want about Barack Obama. I have many criticisms for Obama, but Barack Obama had a passionate base. People came out to vote for Barack Obama. People didn't come out to vote for Joe Biden. They came out to vote against Donald Trump. And this is what you end up with. Let's continue. Take it back a little bit.
Teachers, from casino workers, that literally says there is a problem. And so when liberals tweet me, my fellow liberals or progressives or whatever you want to call yourself tonight, when you tweet me and say that I'm helping Trump, I came to Fox News to tell you that Joe Biden is helping Trump. I came to tell you that Joe Biden is the campaign manager for Donald Trump if he does not if he continues on this path.
We're going to play this part again. Because this is what they do to you when you criticize the Democratic Party, you criticize Joe Biden. This is what they do to you. They do this to her. They've done this to Bree. They've done it to me. They do it to all of us at RBN. They say that we're helping Donald Trump. Listen to what she says. This is very telling.
Problem. And so when liberals tweet me, my fellow liberals or progressives or whatever you want to call yourself tonight, when you tweet me and say that I'm helping Trump, I came to Fox News to tell you that Joe Biden is helping Trump.
She said that Joe Biden is helping Donald Trump. Now, let me explain to you how that's so. Even though Democrat and Republican politicians bicker with each other when it comes to policies, at the end of the day, both parties are corporate and want to maintain the status quo. Democratic Party doesn't want to go too far to the left, and the Republican Party doesn't want them to go too far to the right for the most part. They want to maintain the status quo. So what that means is this. It means that even though someone like Bernie Sanders was the popular candidate in the Democrat primary for 2020, the Democratic Party would have rather Donald Trump win again than for Bernie Sanders to win. Because Trump maintains the status quo. Trump helped out the corporations. That's what they want. So when she said Joe Biden is helping Donald Trump, just think about this, guys. Think about it. Biden is doing this in an effort to prevent any outside threat, to prevent like an RFK. We're going to talk about RFK tonight. Prevent like an RFK, prevent a Cornel West, prevent any of the other independent candidates, prevent whoever ends up running with the Green Party, prevent them from gaining any type of steam and momentum. Because if Joe Biden is so damn bad, well, then it's kind of like a shoo-in for Trump in that way. And the donor class still wins. See how this works? The establishment still wins, regardless if Biden wins or Donald Trump wins. Let's continue. I thought that was an excellent point.
Tweet me and say that I'm helping Trump. I came to Fox News to tell you that Joe Biden is helping Trump. I came to tell you that Joe Biden is the campaign manager for Donald Trump if he does not if he continues on this path. People want a different choice. You had a former president that was on the stand today, Jesse. That means that it should be a landslide for the Democrat side, for Trump to still be winning overwhelmingly in the polls. To still be winning overwhelmingly across the board, it says it is a problem. Get away from the ego, off the high horse, and give people a better option opposed to telling other candidates that you shouldn't run.
What is the better option?
Donald Trump on trial. That's another good example. Donald Trump is on trial and he is still beating Joe Biden in almost every swing state. This is what happens when you abandon the American people, especially the working class people in this country. This is what happens when you abandon those people. This is crazy. And we continue to see you give billions of dollars to Ukraine, billions of dollars to Israel. I bet you a lot of Americans didn't know how much money we were giving to Israel until this war kicked off, huh? And then you take a step back and you wonder, but you guys can't do anything for people in this country, or you won't do anything for people in this country?
For Democrats besides Biden?
Well, it's damn sure not Joe Biden. I guess we'll never know because they won't allow anybody to win. And I want to be very clear because I know people are going to tweet me, oh, I can't believe you're going on Fox. Well, I have to go on Fox because if I go to Liberal Network, they're not going to let you hear it. Your Democrat leaders are not listening to you. Me, myself, organized 300 candidates, operatives, and organizers in Atlanta, Georgia, just last year. Just me, Jesse. Just one woman and a couple of my friends organized candidates from all over the country. There are people who want to run. There are people that need the support. There are people on the local and the state and the federal level that want to raise their hand, but they've been told to sit down, starting with Bernard Sanders, who I used to work for, starting with Senator Warren, who also was a buddy of Bernard Sanders. All of them have been told to sit down and have a seat.
Did you hear what she just said? All of them have been told to sit down and have a seat. So that's another thing I forgot to mention. Teslin did come from the Bernie campaign. I believe she worked with the 2016 Bernie campaign, if I remember correctly. But so she's someone who's been in the thick of it and she understands what is happening here. And this is why I said before, the Democrats would rather lose than to allow someone like Cornel West or like RFK Jr. to win. They would rather just lose and just give it to Donald Trump. They still get to fundraise as long as they get to maintain the status quo. Or they can look at it from this perspective. Look, Joe's doing bad. Let's just go ahead and pretend like we're trying to win this. And instead, just let it lose. Let it just play itself out. People will get Trump for another 4 years. And they'll be so angry with Donald Trump that the Democrat will come back. We'll have a fantastic candidate to run come 2028. And then that candidate will win 2 terms. They like to play. They think it's funny because they think they're playing chess, but they're actually playing checkers because this is starting to backfire on the Democratic Party.
They have sold out their base. Let me be crystal clear. Sold out your base and instead are putting your interests above the people. This is not about Trump. It is a problem on the liberal side. You must have a different option. It's not no more about, well, let's just do lesser of the two evil. Why are people falling off? Why are people striking all over this country? It is an issue. If David Axelrod is saying it, that means it is a problem. It's not just.
When we talk about the strikes, and I'll go back just a little bit, what she was just saying, why are people striking all over this country? Let's all remember the labor strike started under Joe Biden's presidency. That's when all those labor strikes started. When we started covering them on the show, like John Deere, the nurses in Worcester, Massachusetts, at St. Vincent's, we covered who was another one? Kellogg's that we covered. There's been so many of them, the teacher strikes. All those things started under Joe Biden's presidency.
Over this country. It is an issue. If David Axelrod is saying it, that means it is a problem. It's not just Tesla and Figaro, it's David.
You're telling me that Bernie and Warren both won a primary Biden, but the Democrat brass told them to sit down?
I am telling you that every Democrat that wanted to run, the same way they told Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Cornel West, Marianne Williamson, Robert F. Kennedy, everybody that raised their hand that said, hey, I'm willing to run, they were told to sit down, and they're sitting down.
Yeah.
You hear that? They were told to sit down. Who picks the politicians in this country? Banks, Wall Street, military industrial complex, and some billionaires. We'll get to that too. They're chosen, they're selected. Notice they didn't tell Barack Obama to sit down. Think about that.
Let's look around. They're sitting down. Nobody is standing up to say, hey, let us have a different option. And remember, again, Joe Biden said he would be a one-term president. So that was his first lie out the gate. He said he would be a one-term president. So Joe Biden, please, if you love the Democrat Party, if you love the people the way that you say you do, you will fall back and allow another candidate to win. And this has nothing to do with Trump. This is what's happening on the left. People do not have the option that they're looking for.
All right, Teslin, thank you so much for joining Fox. We love hearing what you had to say.
Thank you.
Okay. If anybody knows how to get in touch with her, because I don't have contact information for her. So if anybody knows how to get in touch with her, email me and let me know, because I would love to have her on the show, because I think what she said there needs to be, I wish CNN would let her come on. I wish MSNBC would let her come on. I would like to see her on Morning Joe and give Al Sharpton a piece of her mind. Talk to Al Sharpton. Because people need to hear this. People need to hear it. So they tell certain people to sit down. This is what they do. And I believe they've been doing this for quite some time. I'd probably say since after JFK. But you always got to follow the money, right? If you want to see why Jim Clyburn has some of the views that he does, and he says some of the things that he does, check this out. You guys knew that he takes a lot of money from Big Pharma, but did you know? We go back to his most recent campaign, 2022. Check this out. This is the so-called progressive, right? Okay. Look at how much money Jim Clyburn is taking from AIPAC. See, he's another one. He's another one. This is why he won't call for a ceasefire. But he's progressive. Look at this. AIPAC. Number one. Him, Hakeem Jeffries, and Richie Torres. I told you. So this is the Black misleadership class. The Clyburns, the Cory Bookers, the Jasmine Crockett's. These are the Black misleadership class. They are put there to make you believe that Black people have that representation in DC, but they're not. They are working for us. They're not there to work for the Black community. They are there to work for the donorship class. And that's what people have to understand. Jim Clyburn is more likely to support and advocate for the state of Israel than he is for the Black community. So he can miss me with all that. I am progressive. I came out of struggle. He can miss me with all of that. All you got to do is look up their donors, look up their funding, and then you'll understand why they have the positions that they have and why they move the way that they move. That's all you got to do. Now, the Bronx Anti-War Coalition, They're calling all these politicians out. And honestly, I think this is a great idea. And I think more people should do this. We are going to hold all Bronx politicians who support genocide accountable. Here are where Bronx city and state elected stand. Hint, all are complicit with genocide against the Palestinian people. The Bronx stands with Gaza and Palestine. Check this out. Let me go ahead and.
No ceasefire, no votes. No ceasefire, votes. No ceasefire, no votes.
Bronx electeds, your silence and complicity speaks volumes. We know that you are taking money from Israel and AIPAC, and we're going to make sure that those who support genocide do not get our vote. We stand with the people of Gaza and Palestine and against AIPAC. Here is evidence that Richie Torres is an AIPAC puppet who has taken over $141,000 from the Israeli lobby. Here's a picture of him mingling with those committing genocide. He also hid from his constituents in the South Bronx to hold a rally in Riverdale. Here is Dinowitz vacationing on stolen and occupied land in Palestine. No ceasefire, no votes. Here are the electeds on the ballot today and their stance. Diana Ayala, silent. Eric Dinowitz supports genocide. Kevin Riley, silent. Marjorie Velasquez supports genocide. Pirina Sanchez, silent. Oswald Feliz, silent. Althea Stevens, silent.
You guys notice a pattern? Yeah, I mean, they're all people. Most of them are people of color, right? You have the representation, right? But how do they stand on the issues?
Rafael Salamanca supports genocide. Amanda Farias, silent. Here is Velasquez supporting genocide. No ceasefire, no votes. To all those Bronx electeds supporting genocide, we will vote you out of office.
I want to show you something. You see this picture of this guy right here? Okay, they circled Richie Torres, but you see the guy next to him, Adriano Espaillat? This is the same guy that hosted that military recruitment rally with AOC. That's the same person. So there you go.
Supporting genocide, we will vote you out of office.
So that is the Bronx Anti-War Coalition. Great activists there. Follow them on Twitter. They've been confronting their politicians, and what they just did there, it would be great if we had that in every district, right? If someone had a video like that for every district of the politicians and where they stand on this particular issue, that would be awesome. If you have not had a chance to do so, guys, go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me out with the algo. Thank you very much. And Eric, I'm ready for part 2 of Type B and C whenever you're ready. But you guys get the point. The Miss Leadership class. It's all a fraud. All a fraud. A kid says, Sabby, will you be discussing the boycotting of Starbucks? I'll have to do that on Thursday. Big show Thursday, by the way. Thank you on the super chat. Blue Moon Red Wine. Hello, everyone. Bronx Anti-War did another action and video today where they listed all the complicit reps. Please share it at Bronx Anti-War. Thank you. Kid says, damn, those activists are truly dedicated. Yes. Vegan. Oops, I skipped one. I'm sorry. Thank you for the super chat, Skyzer. Who's this almighty lobby that can so easily bribe entire Congress and parliaments around the world? Is this the arms industry? What next then? I'm gonna come back to you, Vegan. Thank you. Eric says Clyburn is signaling to the black donor class. That's right. He's not talking to the rest of us. Thank you. None of your business for the super chat. The young won't come out to vote in elections. Based on that poll that I had last time, it seems like a good amount of people said that they were going to stay home. Thank you, Nelson, for the super sticker. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Sabby and Eric T, for your hard work. And thank you, Jay, for the folks who say they don't remember Biden saying he'll be a one-term president. It's okay. I'm sure you remember him saying nothing will fundamentally change. It's essentially the same thing. Wow, that's a good point. And I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Hi, Sabby slipped up and called her Jasmine Sullivan. Oh, no. Sorry. R&B singer. Yeah, I know Jasmine Sullivan is R&B singer. Anyway, Jasmine needs to know that what people are feeling is their reaction to their lived experience. Fine. Some may not know civics, but we don't need to know civics. We don't need civics lessons for you to serve us. NYC population is 7.6 million, yet in 2016, 1.9 million voted. In 2020, 2.2 million voted, and in 2022, 1.7 million voted. Sabs, that's a lot of registered voters not voting. Not voting for AOC, Nadler, Hakeem, can be beat with independence. Yeah, so what Roger is showing us is that the majority of voters, the majority of people in New York City in particular, are not voting. Very interesting. Very interesting. We are going to move on to our next story, which is about Bernie Sanders and some of the comments that he made in a recent interview on CNN, which really gave some of his most loyal supporters pause. And so people are pretty angry with Bernie Sanders about his comments here. So the first one that I want to play is, oh, hold on. I am missing. Oh, I clicked on the wrong one. The first one that I want to play here is the part of the interview where they actually discuss what's happening to Rashida Tlaib. So shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Bernie Sanders talks about Rashida Tlaib accusing Biden of supporting genocide in Gaza. Listen to this, and then we're going to get into what happened on the floor today.
Senator, Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib released a video on Friday. I want you to watch part of it.
Mr. President, the American people are not with you on this one. We will remember in 2024.
That last screen said Joe Biden supported the genocide of the Palestinian people. I know you know the definition of genocide. It is defined as a crime committed with intent to destroy a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Do you think that's what Israel is doing here?
Pause. Do you notice what she just did? Notice she goes, now you know the definition of genocide. If he knows the definition of it, why did she feel the need to say it? And notice how she stressed the word intent. Propaganda 101, CNN.
What's going on right now is a horror show. We don't have to quibble about words. Thousands of men, women, and children are being killed. It has got to end right now. And one of the things that concerns me, Donna, is there has not been enough talk about what right-wing Republicans are doing right now. They don't want any aid to go to the Palestinians. Somebody should be talking about that.
Pause. Look at what Bernie Sanders does. He immediately pivots to what the Republicans are doing. This is Bernie Sanders running cover for the Democratic Party. This is what his job is. He's a registered independent, but Bernie Sanders is a sheepdog for the Democratic Party. He runs cover for the Democratic Party. That is actually his role. Remember what Teslin just said to you in the previous clip where she said, Bernie Sanders, all these people were told to sit down and take a seat, and they obey like a good little dog. This is exactly what they do. So notice how he switches it and pivots to the Republican Party so he doesn't have to really sit up there and criticize the Democratic Party.
Somebody should be talking about how Trump wants to expel Palestinians from this country. So it's, you can disagree with Joe Biden, but on his worst day, he'll be 100 times better than where Trump and the right-wing Republicans.
So you think that Rashida Tlaib should save her ire for Trump and the right wing and not her fellow Democrat?
So here's the thing about him saying Joe Biden would be 100 times better than Donald Trump on his worst day. If that's the case, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden would be winning those swing states instead of Donald Trump. There's a reason why he's not winning in those states. And Bernie Sanders, by the way, doesn't even take corporate money. So this is another example that shows you just because you run grassroots campaigns doesn't mean you can't be bought and paid for.
Rashida is a friend of mine. Her family comes from Palestine. I think she's been shaken, as all of us are, about what is going on right there, right now.
Yeah,
we have to address that humanitarian crisis. But if anyone thinks that Trump is going to be better than Biden on this issue or any other issue for that matter, I think they are sorely mistaken.
Both of them will give funding to Israel. Why are you? See, this is the thing with Bernie Sanders. Just keep it real and say both of them would do this. Both of them would support Israel. Both of them would support sending weapons to Israel to keep this going. Notice that he did not answer the question. Do you agree with Rashida Tlaib in reference to Joe Biden is complicit in genocide? His response is, well, Rashida is a good friend of mine. Everybody, you're a good friend, but you have a funny way of treating your friends. Everybody his good friend, but he got a funny way of treating them. You guys notice this? Because he sure as hell treats some of these establishment Democrats that are good friends like Joe Biden a lot better than he treated some of the ones that supported him. If you pay attention to this, but he didn't answer that question. Let's continue.
And I understand that. I also understand, and I know you know that words matter. And I want to ask about what she said.
See what's happening, ladies and gentlemen? Look, this is Bernie Sanders getting flustered because Dana Bash is pushing him to answer the question, a question that he does not want to answer. Because the thing is, this is what happens when you try to be friends with everybody. Sometimes you just got to have some enemies. I'm not friends with everybody. Sometimes you got to take a side. And this is Bernie Sanders not really wanting to take a side. He trying to be friends with on the progressive side, and he's still trying to be friends on the establishment side. I don't want to screw up things for Joe Biden, but at the same time, I got to convince people that I'm still progressive, so I can't like completely bash Rashida Tlaib. So this is Bernie Sanders losing his cool. Have you seen this recently? Uh-huh. How dare you push back on me?
Oh, that words matter. And I want to ask about what she said.
Words matter, but what matters more, Dana, is you have a horrible humanitarian disaster that has to be dealt with right now. You call it whatever you want to call it. It has to be dealt with. Women and children cannot be bombed with 2,000-pound bombs. And we need the entire world.
So when she says from the river.
Let me pause here. This is Bernie Sanders pretending like this that the humanitarian crisis that is happening in Palestine is new, is not new. Yes, over 10,000 Palestinian people have been killed. Over 10,000 Palestinian people have been killed. Now, if Joe Biden was willing to acknowledge the Armenian genocide, which I believe Bernie Sanders was willing to acknowledge that as well. But when it comes to Palestinian people, and I think particularly because not just because they're Muslim, but because the U.S. government has this relationship with the state of Israel, I really do believe that at the end of the day, if it were a different country under a different name, they would say differently. Because let's keep it real. If this was happening to people in France, do you think Bernie Sanders would have no problem saying, well, France is an ally and we got to protect? They'd have no problem with this. They would all call for a ceasefire immediately because that's one of them. So think about this. So he's flustered.
It has to be dealt with. Women and children cannot be bombed with 2,000-pound bombs. And we need the entire world.
So when she says from the river to the sea, when she says from the river to the sea, which the ADL says is anti-Semitic, she says it's aspirational, but the ADL says it is anti-Semitic. Do you want her to stop using terms like that?
So the ADL is the keeper of all things. The ADL is a Zionist organization. And if you look on Twitter, you'll see that the ADL has said some pretty racist things to Black people. Let's just keep it real. So here's Dana Bash again, CNN propaganda. The ADL does not have the final say. So here we go. So here's the issue with from the river to the sea.
It's aspirational, but the ADL says it is anti-Semitic. Do you want her to stop using terms like that?
Well,
and others.
Donna, you know, it's not what I want and anything else. This is what you got. President Obama just said the other day, I think quite correctly, and we all got to deal with it. This is an enormously complex issue. And
no, it's not. See what I told you about Barack Obama, what he does? I told you how Barack Obama comes in to let the people know, let the politicians know, let me go ahead and take the hit for this one. And then you guys will repeat my talking points and know that it's okay to say the same thing that I said. This is what Barack Obama does. Barack Obama is not a politician anymore. Why are you focusing on what he said, Bernie Sanders, considering the fact that you actually considered primary in Barack Obama? Now, all of a sudden, what Barack Obama says is words of wisdom for Bernie Sanders.
Slogans like the river to the sea, if that means the destruction of Israel, that's not going to work. People who are saying Israel, right or wrong, we're for you all the way, that's not going to work. This is a horrendously complex issue. You got a right-wing government in Israel, which is racist. And the people, by the way, the good news is last poll I saw, only 18% of the people of Israel want Netanyahu to stay in office. I hope.
Pause that there. Hold on to that piece that he said right there. You have a right-wing government in Israel, which is racist. Hold on to that, because that'll be important when we get to the next clip.
They get rid of them. I hope they put in a government which understands the severity of the crisis and can help us move to the two-tier state.
Senator.
And on the other hand, in terms of Hamas, you got a terrorist organization that cannot be trusted for a minute. This is, as President Obama said, a very complex issue.
Senator, real quick, and you're really alluding to this in your answers in our discussion here. You really are in a unique position, maybe even a difficult one, because you're a leading progressive voice in American politics, and you're also Jewish. And you have family who died in the Holocaust. How difficult is this for you?
This is the funny part to me, not obviously what happened to his family, but the fact that now all of a sudden they want to know how difficult it is for Bernie Sanders to be Jewish, having what happened to his family members as well. But they weren't concerned about that when Bernie Sanders was getting anti-Semitic tropes in magazines about him when he was running for president. When newspapers and magazines were drawing pictures of Bernie Sanders that were definitely clearly anti-Semitic, they weren't worried about that. They didn't have a problem with that at all because they didn't want Bernie Sanders to be president. They wanted someone that would maintain the status quo, and they didn't want someone that's going to move anything in reference to healthcare that would benefit everybody. They weren't worried about how he felt as a Jewish person then. Now, all of a sudden, CNN is worried about how Bernie Sanders feels as a Jewish person because he's not running for president. And this is CNN, obviously, again, trying to push their propaganda and try to get Bernie Sanders to say, you got to speak out against what is happening here to your people. Let's continue.
It's nothing to do with me, Donna. What this is as a nation, we are living now, in my view, through a more difficult moment than we have lived in my lifetime. You know, people are worried about, we had the pandemic, we're worried about climate change, worried about the attacks on democracy. Our healthcare system is collapsing. We have artificial information, which is going to, make radical changes to the economy. You got a crime all over this country. People are worried and they're concerned. All that I am begging people is to understand slogans are not going to do it. Social media is not going to do it. We need a serious discussion of how the hell we get out of this difficult situation, maintain democracy, bring peace to the world. And it ain't easy, but slogans are not going to do it on any side.
Bring peace to the world, but he won't call for a ceasefire.
Senator, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that did not go well, but that's not the part that made people angry. This is the clip that made people angry. Notice that this is shared by AIPAC. Notice this, guys. AIPAC is sharing this clip from the interview. You got to hear this.
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go. So
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas.
Now, I want to remind you, in the previous clip, Bernie Sanders said that you have a racist right-wing government right now through Netanyahu, and he says, and that's a problem. But Bernie Sanders, having said that, is not bold enough to call for a ceasefire. If you know that the government is inherently racist and the people that they have that are occupied, that are being oppressed, are not a part of the same race, then you know that the government has been mistreating the people. That didn't start October 7th. That started 75 years ago, but you won't call for a ceasefire. And that is why this was tweeted by AIPAC. Now, Bernie Sanders doesn't take money from AIPAC, but this was AIPAC sending a message. Some of Bernie's most loyal supporters, like Humanist Report. This is a screenshot because Humanist Report blocked me. I tried to tell him about Bernie Sanders, but no, I was considered a dummy, a dipshit, a nihilist, all that kind of stuff. Even he said, good job, Bernie Sanders. An extremist, racist organization like AIPAC is now promoting your words. You are burning your legacy to the ground. Shame on you, coward. You're 3 years late. 3 years late. It took him to not call for a ceasefire for you to realize that Bernie Sanders was a coward after all this time. But we tried to say that. We tried to tell people like Mike that. But no, we were Jimmy Dore people, and now I want to show you. He won't call for a ceasefire. Let me show you what happened today. On the House floor, Rashida Tlaib is under the threat right now to be censured. Listen to what Rashida Tlaib had to say. And Bernie Sanders, sheep, dog, and ass can't even call for a ceasefire. Listen to this.
I can't believe I have to say this, but Palestinian people are not disposable.
Oh, and by the way, you heard what she said? Palestinian people are not disposable. You know who else had to say something similar to that? Black people. Black people had to say this in reference to police brutality.
We are human beings, just like anyone else. My city My grandmother, like all Palestinians, just wants to live her life with freedom and human dignity we all deserve. Speaking up to save lives, Mr. Chair, no matter faith, no matter ethnicity, should not be controversial in this chamber. The cries of the Palestinian and Israeli children sound no different to me. Why? What I don't understand is why the cries of Palestinians sound different to you all. We cannot lose our shared humanity, Mr. Chair. I hear the voices of advocates in Israel, in Palestine, across America, and around the world for peace. I am inspired by the courageous survivors in Israel who have lost loved ones, yet are calling for a ceasefire and the end to violence. I am grateful to the people in the streets for the peace movement, with countless Jewish Americans across the country standing up and lovingly saying, "Not in our name." We will continue to call for a ceasefire, Mr. Chair, for the immediate delivery of critical humanitarian aid to Gaza, for the release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained, and for every American to come home. We will continue to work for a real lasting peace that upholds human rights and dignity of all people, and centers in peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians, and censures no one, and ensures that no person, no child has to suffer or live in fear of violence.
Okay, so that's Rashida Tlaib's speech. It's sad that in 2023, you have to actually say to people that Palestinians are not disposable. Ilhan Omar also came in to defend Rashida Tlaib as well.
What is true here is that every single one of them has not acknowledged the fact that Palestinians are dying in the tens of thousands, but will continue to say it is us who are not acknowledging humanity. Rashida will stand strong.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Movement will continue for liberation until every single Palestinian has the right.
Look who crying over here in the corner. This is Pramila Jayapal. She over there crying, you know.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
What is?
Okay, so that's Ilhan Omar, and Cory Bush also spoke up in defense of Rashida Tlaib.
Of a lack of care and a lack of understanding and a lack of seeing the humanity of folks who look like Rashida Tlaib. It's outrageous that my colleagues are blatantly attempting to silence the only Palestinian American representative right here. It's outrageous, but it's not surprising. And let me tell you, it's not surprising because this place is where 1,700 members of Congress, this elected body, enslaved black people. It's not surprising because they thought it was right. It's not surprising because this is a place where members continue to claim that the insurrection on the Capitol just appeared to look like a normal tourist visit. It's not surprising because this is the place where our black and brown staff members repeatedly speak of experiencing racism and sexism, Islamophobia, get pushed off of elevators, xenophobia, and more right here in this workplace.
Did you guys hear what she said about the staffers? She said this is the same place where the staffers experience Islamophobia and racism.
This is the place, and let me say this: she mourns for the 1,400 Israelis.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
She mourns for the 10,000, and she will not stop. No more.
Time
no
has expired.
More. Ceasefire now, and she takes the death threats that you all send. That they.
The gentlelady is no longer recognized. The gentleman from Maryland.
The desire to save lives is greater.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
That's what I said.
Now, I'm going to say something here for a second, and people, please don't take this the wrong way. Had the squad had our back when we needed them to have our back during the pandemic, we were just asking them, can you please just force the vote for Medicare for all so everybody can get health care? Can you, Lisa, please just do that? Had the squad had our back when it came to the speakership issue, when it came to the policing issue, when it came to the Iron Dome issue, had the squad had our back, it would be so much easier for us to have their back right now. This energy that we just saw, that we just witnessed, that's the same energy that they should have brought to the Democrat leadership that continue to suppress them and suppress their voices. The same leadership that told Cory Bush's office that they're not allowed to speak. The same Democrat leadership that told them to get in line. Had they raised that same voice, we would have been behind them. They would have had an army behind them, not just on the inside, but also on the outside. Now it's too late. And it sucks. What is happening to Rashida Tlaib? That is terrible. And I'm going to show you what censure means in reference to a Congress member. That is terrible. But it's like you guys abandoned us on the outside for years. You got your ticket, you got your seat, and you guys pretended like we didn't exist. Cory Bush, you came to the March for Medicare for All in DC to tell us that you didn't like it. You came to the march to tell us that you did not approve of what we were doing, as if we need to get your permission to do a march. AOC, you were campaigning for Nina Turner. Y'all weren't, the rest of you guys wanted nothing to do with it. Nothing. When we were asking you to help us on the outside to promote the actions, you were nowhere to be found. You guys got comfortable. You got your seats. You got your fancy apartments in DC, and you pieced out on all of us. So it is very difficult for me to tell, what am I supposed to tell my audience to have your back now when you abandon us? Now I'm going to show you what it means to censure someone who is a Congress member. Let me pull this up over here. Whee! What are the consequences of being censured? I'll make it bigger because the writing. There we go. Members of Congress who have been censured are required to give up any committee chairs they hold. Like a reprimand, a censure does not remove a member from their office, so they retain their title, stature, and power to vote. There are also no legal consequences that come with a reprimand of censure. And it also says to express severe disapproval of someone or something, especially in a formal statement. So, what was really interesting about all of that is that Norm Finklestein actually responded to Bernie Sanders. This is funny. Hold on, we're going to laugh a little bit tonight. This is funny, but it's on point. Norm Finklestein actually played that clip from Bernie on his podcast, and listen to what he said. This is his response to Bernie Sanders.
Claire Daly, the Irish representative in the European Union, she said, quote, referring to van der Leyen, she said, quote, if you have nothing constructive to say, shut up. I'm going to repeat that to you, Bernie. If you have nothing constructive to say, shut up. So here are the facts. When Hamas was elected, it repeatedly sent out peace feelers to try to resolve the conflict with Israel. It presented on its own, or as speaking for itself, the terms of the international consensus for resolving the conflict, namely 2 states on the June 1967 border. Now, it's true, because I have no quarrel with facts. I've always been of the opinion that There's no contradiction between truth and the struggle for justice. And if there were a contradiction between the two, it would probably cause me a moral crisis. But at the end of the day, I would come out on the side of truth. Hamas, yes, it's true. There were areas such as its demand for the full implementation of the right of the return of Palestinian refugees to the homes from which they were expelled in 1948. Even though that is the law, I recognize that as part of the settlement, that particular aspect of international law would probably have to be negotiated. I'm not saying I don't want to speak for the Palestinians. I'm rendering as it were, third-party judgment from afar. But there is no question that Hamas was attempting to reach some sort of settlement with Israel.
That part right there. That's the part that a lot of people, including Bernie Sanders, leave out. That there was an attempt to have an agreement. And I brought up the issue of the Arab Initiative of 2002. That was also another opportunity, but the state of Israel rejected that as well. Now, what was interesting about that, we get through all of that, now Bernie Sanders trying to play both sides. So Bernie Sanders comes out with this statement after that interview and after AIPAC shared that clip, and he says, AIPAC has supported dozens of GOP extremists who are undermining our democracy. They're now working hard to defeat progressive members of Congress. We won't let that happen. Let us stand together in the fight for a world of peace, economic and social justice, and climate sanity. You want to have climate sanity and social justice, but you won't call for a ceasefire. Make that make sense, folks. We talked about this before. The number one, single most polluter of the world is the military industrial complex, but you won't call for a ceasefire, but you want climate sanity. You want to have social justice, but you still want the Palestinian people to continue to get bombed. Get out of here with this mess, Bernie. Get out of here. I responded to this and I said, AIPAC is boosting you right now. Stop playing the American people, stop this charade, and retire. And that's how I feel about Bernie Sanders in this moment. And to sum up that news segment, I think that Bernie Sanders needs to do everyone a favor. He's past retirement age. I think if you are going to continue to be a puppet for the Democratic Party and their donors, it doesn't matter if you're running a grassroots campaign because you are still following the orders of the Democrat leadership donors. So if that is what you are going to continue to do, Bernie Sanders, I think you need to retire. Go retire. Let the next generation come in and handle this biz, okay? Go vacation wherever you want to go. Go write some more books, but just go ahead and step down because you just continue to embarrass yourself. That's my take on that. Go to some of the comments. Vegan, what is Boule? Oh, Black Boule is like some people call it like a secret society where people who are basically the upper crust members of society. Thank you, a kid, for the super chat. Sabby, Bernie Sanders sold out not only his followers and movement, but his humanity for not supporting a ceasefire. Bingo. David says you cannot demand a ceasefire and support Israel at the same time. Well, Bernie can. Thank you, President Jafar. I knew Dana would pull his Jew card. Oh boy. Yeah, she did. She did. Thank you, Shane. Why must there be a debate on whether it's a genocide or not? If it has gone far enough to debate the question, it doesn't matter. Interesting. And thank you, Old Crow. I'm still upset. They had a whole sitting congressman or senator wearing a complete IDF uniform, yet they want to censure Tlaib. That's BS in itself. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Last week, Bernie commented that he finds what is going on with Israel and Palestine an annoyance because it is stealing the spotlight from labor. One, Sab, did he vote against the railroad strike? I think he voted. I'm trying to remember. I thought he voted the other way. I thought he did. Two, Bernie had the spotlight on labor in 2016, but you laid down your arms in 2016 and chose not to fight. What you think? What you prioritize will have the spotlight forever. We must seize moment when we have it. This is true. And we've talked about this before on Call-In too. When you have that moment, you have to seize it. Speaking of seizing a moment, RFK Jr. also getting heavily attacked because of some comments that he made. And it all started with this tweet. So RFK Jr., he is retweeting Bill Ackman. We're going to get into him. Bravo, Bill Ackman. It's time to hold college administrations responsible for the epidemic of campus anti-Semitism by insisting on zero tolerance policies. RFK Jr. is quick to come and defend certain groups. You ever notice that? You ever notice that? So let me show you what he's referring to. Bill Ackman, and I'm going to tell you who Bill is in a second as well. Please see my letter below to the president of Harvard University sent today. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but there are a couple of points I want to point out. I'm writing this letter to you regretfully. Never did I think I would have to write a letter to the president of my alma mater about the impact of her actions and inactions on the health and the safety of its student body in order to help catalyze necessary change. For the past 4 weeks since the horrors of October 7th, I've been in dialogue with members of the corporation board, other alumni, as well as students and faculty, sharing and comparing our concerns about the growing number of anti-Semitic incidents on campus as we wait for you and the university to act. 4 weeks after the barbaric terrorist acts of October 7th, notice they're all using the same vocabulary, barbaric. I have lost confidence that you and the university will do what is required. Last Wednesday, I spent 7 hours on campus meeting with Jewish, Israeli, and non-Jewish students and faculty at the law school, at Harvard Business School, and in a 90-minute town hall in Aldrich 112 with 230 Jewish college students, coincidentally, one for each hostage held by Hamas, research staff, and faculty from university at large, organized by Harvard Chabad. Over the course of the day, it became clear that the situation at Harvard is dire and getting worse, much worse than I had realized. So let me just stop there for a second. Notice who he chose to meet with and who he chose not to meet with. Why didn't you meet with both groups? Why didn't you also meet with Palestinian students, Bill? Another piece that I want to point out here. He said that Jewish students were bullied, physically intimidated, spat on, and severely widely disseminated videos of one such incident, physically assaulted. Student Slack message boards are replete with anti-Semitic statements, memes, and images. Our campus posters on the Widener Library steps and elsewhere shout out Intifada, Intifada. From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free, as they knowingly call for a violent insurrection and use eliminationist language, seeking the destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Let's talk about this phrase here for a second. First of all, that's not what that phrase means. So what Bill and what RFK Jr., I'm going to show you something else RFK Jr. said in reference to them. What they're trying to do is that they're trying to now claim that that phrase in itself is anti-Semitic because that is what the ADL said. That's not even what the phrase means. So you see how RFK Jr. just basically repeats what the ADL says or what they say at these APAC conventions. He doesn't do this research for himself. He just repeats what they say. And Bill is doing the same thing. But we're going to get into Bill in a second. And I want to get to this part right here. He basically lays out this plan for Harvard where he says this is something that they need to do to make something better. He goes on to talk about the Jewish students at Harvard. This is a long letter. That's why I said I'm not reading this entire thing. He brings in DEI. Oh, now all of a sudden he cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's interesting. Funny coming from him. Let me go down here. This is a comparison that he makes. How would you respond to a Harvard white supremacist protest where students shouted Tulsa, Tulsa, Tulsa from the Atlantic to the Pacific? America should be free of Black people. Let me highlight this right here. This is the dumbest shit I have seen. This guy is a billionaire, by the way. That is not what from the river to the sea means. Don't even bring Black people into this shit. Don't even try to bring us into this, Bill, because you're not too keen on Black people. See, I know some things about Bill. Bill's not too keen on Black people. Just keep that in mind. Let's continue. And then this piece here at the end, because I told you this is a really long letter and we don't have time for all this. At the end, he calls out all these things. You guys can read this on your own. This part down here, he said, I would be delighted to help in any way that I can to enable you to succeed in this mission and as Harvard's president. Please let me know what more I can do to help. Now, Bill Ackman obviously is an alum. He puts his, graduation dates there from his MBA and then also his business degree as well from undergrad. Now, let me tell you something about Bill. Bill is a billionaire hedge fund manager. Now, Bill is one of those billionaires like David Sachs that claims that they love free speech so much. Everything. We really got to protect free speech. So first and foremost, that phrase coming from people showing solidarity with the Palestinian people, that phrase is not anti-Semitic. Bill doesn't even know what the hell he's talking about. He's just repeating talking points from other organizations. Again, notice how he only chose to meet with one group. He didn't choose to meet with any of the Palestinian students. He didn't ask them how they feel. He didn't point out any incidents of Islamophobia. Now, all of a sudden, you care about how groups are treated at these institutions, Bill. Where were you when the Black students were bullied and taunted and harassed on Harvard's campus and it made national news? Where were you, Bill? You were nowhere to be found because that was about Black people. So here's Bill with his hypocritical ass. Here's Bill talking about free speech. And so, of course, underneath, you'll see underneath his picture, you'll see they're kind of like making fun of him. So listen to this. Uh-oh, what just happened? Oh, here we go. Oh, no. Let me retweet. Sorry, I had to refresh. Why did it take me to this one? These YouTube, Eric, can you put that back up? It's a YouTube short, and sometimes those, I guess because I scrolled down, it did the thing. It should be on the pad there. Thanks so much. While he does that, I'll get to this. Thank you for the super chat, John. If we had socialism, all the baby boomers could retire. That's a good point. Good point there, John. Okay, there it is. All right, I won't scroll down this time. Listen to this.
One of the sad things about our country right now is I think free speech has been crushed to a great extent. If you can say something, if you could express a political view and get fired today, which is definitely a very real possibility, only if you're financially independent or, an entrepreneur of some kind, or you've got enough money in the bank, can you take the risk of speaking freely. One of the sad things about our country right now is I think free speech has been crushed to a great extent. If you can say something, if you could express a political view and get fired today, which is definitely a very real possibility, only if you're financially independent or, an entrepreneur of some kind, or you've got enough money in the bank, can you take the risk of speaking freely. One of the sad.
So here's Bill Ackman, because people found this. And Bill Ackman is saying he's an advocate for free speech. And he talks about how you can be silenced. You can lose job prospects, which he approves, by the way. He approves of these students that wrote that letter at Harvard University. He approves of them losing job opportunities. So Bill is a hypocrite. But you also need to know that the other reason why RFK Jr. is defending Bill Ackman is because Bill Ackman donated to his campaign. See, you always got to follow the money. I tell you, these politicians ain't shit. I'm telling you every time. Investor Bill Ackman and David Sachs' PAC donated to RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign. Both David Sachs and Bill Ackman are billionaires, just FYI. Let's go. And that's Bill Ackman right there. Billionaire hedge fund chief Bill Ackman donated $3,300 in the second quarter to Democrat presidential candidate RFK Jr.'s campaign during the second quarter, according to the FEC filing. Ackman's donation came just days after he sided in a tweet with Kennedy's broadly debunked skepticism about the jab. Ackman, the CEO of Pershing Square Capital, explained to CNBC days later, I listened to RFK on several podcasts and a town hall and thought he raised important issues about it and other issues that were worth learning more about. When asked at the time, he didn't say whether he had donated to Kennedy's campaign. Ackman is one of several prominent business leaders who donated to Kennedy's campaign in the second quarter. The Purple Good Government PAC, a committee that's been largely funded by investor and Elon Musk ally David Sachs, donated $6,600 to the campaign. Ken Fisher, the founder and executive chairman of Fisher Investments, donated $6,600 to the campaign, according to the filing. And here's another one. Veteran Wall Street executive Omid Malik also donated $6,600 to the campaign, the filing says. So again, this is why I always tell you to follow the money, and then you'll see that, of course, he is going to endorse this guy's statement because that is someone who donated to his campaign. But RFK Jr. is supposed to be the free speech guy. What happened to that, Mr. I'm pro free speech. I'm the peace candidate. Brianna Joy Gray had something to say about this. She said RFK Jr. coming out in favor of sanctioning college students for pro-Palestinian speech and using threats to their post-grad employment opportunities as a cudgel to silence them. Not the pro-speech candidate, not the guy who's anti-censorship. RFK actually responded to Brianna Joy Gray, and he said, I support the freedom to express all protected speech. I encourage respectful discussions from all sides of the Gaza crisis. I don't support bullying, harassment, intimidation, and discrimination that has inspired fear in Jewish students and caused some to stop wearing yarmulke on campus. The First Amendment does not protect such conduct, and campus administrations should crack down. I look forward to talking in person. So let me go ahead and debunk something that he said in this statement. I encourage respectful discussions from all sides of the Gaza crisis. Really? If that's true, then why hasn't he had this conversation with Max Blumenthal? Why hasn't he had this conversation with Useful Idiots podcast? Why hasn't he had this conversation with Norm Finklestein? Why hasn't he had this conversation with any other Jewish individual that disagrees with him on this issue? It goes on. Bree responded back and said, there is an active dispute on whether from the river to the sea Palestine will be free constitutes a call for genocide. Many Jewish groups who've organized the protests over the last few weeks have said it's a call to end of occupation and apartheid. And that's what it really means. But see, RFK Jr. can't say that because then he would have to acknowledge that the occupation and the apartheid actually exists in the first place, which he doesn't want to do. That would hurt his donor class. She goes on to say the statement you endorse would punish protesters based on subjective definitions of threats to Jewish students, and it reproduces allegations of bullying that have been disproven. And notice he never brings up what's happening to the Palestinian people. He never brings up no, we're not going to talk about Palestinian kids being bullied. RFK doesn't want to talk about Palestinians being taken from their home, having their land taken from them, being put into an open air prison. He don't want to talk about any of that. None of it. So no, he's not interested in entertaining discussions from all sides about Gaza. She goes on to say, I'd be more than happy to discuss this with you. I've reached out to invite you on Bad Faith Podcast in the past, but will do so again. I appreciate your openness to dialogue. A lot of people on the left that I know of have reached out months ago to have this conversation with RFK Jr. Now, let me tell you what I think is really going on. And then I'm going to show you this video from RFK Jr. I really think that RFK Jr. is running an illusion of a campaign. Let me rephrase it this way. I think that RFK Jr. is running the illusion of an outsider campaign. Let me break that down. RFK Jr. is running outside the two-party system. He left the Democratic Party. He's running as an independent. We commended him for doing that. That still doesn't mean he doesn't have shit takes. So RFK Jr. is now running this campaign outside the duopoly. So now people are like, all right, awesome. He broke away from the Democratic Party, a true independent challenge. Here we go. He is the anti-establishment candidate. He's there to take down this system. He's not an insider. But is that true? RFK Jr. is accepting his donations from billionaires. That's who's supporting his campaign. David Sachs, Bill Ackman, a lot of these tech bros, that's who's supporting RFK Jr.'s campaigns. Now, you say that you're out there and you're going to fight for the American people, the working class people are suffering. How is that going to happen when you're basically in bed with all these billionaires and these hedge fund managers? You guys really believe that? You guys know this is a joke, right? I said the same thing. When Cornel West took that money from that billionaire, I said that was not good. A lot of people criticized him for that, and he gave the money back. RFK is not giving it back. RFK Jr. is in bed with his class. You have to understand, we are not in the same class as him. He is a Kennedy. And I live in Massachusetts, and Kennedys are like royalty here. So you have to understand that. We're not on the same page as him. We're not. He is not going to jeopardize his social standing in society and go against the billionaire class. And I'm going to show you how he's a hypocrite in this own video that he posted on Twitter. Then he says he is the peace candidate. He makes this statement that we need to give Israel the money and the weapons so that they can fight. But he's a peace candidate. And a lot of people called him out for that. He lost some support after that statement. People that I knew that were staunch RFK Jr. supporters. But he's the peace candidate. He says he's pro free speech, right? But here he is saying that you should censor and silence these students at Harvard. By the way, the students at Harvard that wrote the letter, most of those students are Black. I know because unlike RFK Jr., I actually was at the rally that those students spoke at. RFK Jr. wants them to lose their job prospects. RFK Jr., you want these Black college students to lose their job prospects? Because you believe some statement that the ADO said about a phrase, so you don't do your own research. You don't talk to any of the Palestinian people. You don't talk to the protesters. You just believe what you read. So you believed what you were told. And now you want those students to be silenced and to lose job opportunities. But you're the free speech candidate. This is a joke. Let me tell you what he means by free speech. When RFK Jr. says he's against censorship and he's pro-free speech, you need to ask this question. Free speech for who? What kind of speech, RFK? What are you okay with people discussing? And speech that benefits who? Because what I've noticed, it seems like it's speech that benefits the donor class. Think about this, guys. This shit was all planned. This goes all the way back to that Defeat the Mandates rally. When he spoke at that rally then, that was him basically gearing up for a presidential run. Notice he doesn't go on to shows that have a left-wing audience. Yes, he went on the Glenn Greenwald show. He went on the Jimmy Dore show. But most of the people in those shows are not left. You can tell just by looking at the comments. Notice he won't have this conversation with Max after he said he would. What is he so afraid of? He's supposed to take on the CIA and the deep state. He's supposed to do all this stuff, but he won't have a conversation on a podcast with Max Blumenthal? You guys really believe this guy? RFK is there to give you the impression that you have an outside candidate that is not an insider, that is not a part of the system, but he is very much a part of the same corporate system that he said that he would fight against. And he's going to expose himself here in this video that he posted. Listen to this.
Why the decision to run for president?
We need to end this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is destroying our country. That collaboration is responsible for the forever wars that are bankrupting the middle class, that are causing this inflationary spiral, for the poisoning of our water, of our environment, of our food supply.
Pause. Let's go back, because I can already debunk two things that he just said in this ad. Guys, you can't, I'll be honest with you. I will not let people fall for this shit again. After Bernie, I will not let people fall for this again.
We need to end this corrupt merger of state and corporate power, which is destroying our country. That collaboration is responsible for the forever wars that are bankrupting the middle class, that are causing this inflationary spiral for the...
Pause. We need to end this merger of corporations with politics, right, with government. But he taking corporate money. Let's continue. Let's get to this part here about the water.
Middle class that are causing this inflationary spiral for the poisoning of our water, of our environment,
the poisoning of our water, our environment, and our food supply. But RFK Jr. has no problem with the Palestinians having their water poisoned. RFK Jr. has traveled all across the world, guys, in reference to his environmental activism. He didn't just do environmental activism in the United States. He did environmental activism also in South America. He's traveled all across this world. So this isn't just an issue that he was passionate about in reference to America. He was passionate about this on a global level, except when it comes to Palestinians. Let's go on.
Our food supply. And it's also it's causing this extraordinarily systematic shift in wealth upward, away from the working poor, away from the middle class, to create this new aristocracy of billionaires. In 500 days of lockdown, we created...
Pause. Nearly 500 people became billionaires during the pandemic year. Listen to what he says here. Let me go back. Where's my little thingy? Now, remember what I already showed you. Watch this.
From the middle class to create this new aristocracy of billionaires. In 500 days of lockdown, we created 500 new billionaires. And we taught everybody.
So essentially what RFK Jr. is, he's taking bits and pieces from Bernie Sanders campaigns and bits and pieces from Trump's campaign and merged them all together as one. So now he's talking about the billionaires, which Bernie Sanders did, right? He's talking about the billionaires now, but he's taking money from billionaires. What I just show you? He's taking money from Bill Ackman. He's taking money from David Sachs. He's taking money from billionaires. So I'm supposed to believe that he's going to stop that funnel going up to the billionaire class, that he's going to call for this end of this type of capitalism that supports the billionaires, and he's getting donations from billionaires? Guys, this guy is playing you. This is what I'm trying to tell you. I saw this shit with Bernie. I'm telling you now, this is a scam. And what makes it worse is that unlike Bernie, he was willing to leave the Democratic Party and do it outside of the Democratic Party, outside the duopoly. So now more people really think he's the real deal, unlike Bernie, because Bernie wasn't willing to do it. This guy is playing you for a fool. How you gonna target the billionaire class and you're taking their money, goddammit? Let's continue.
In this country to use Amazon to forsake the local retailers who are now, all boarded up. And those are the people who pay local taxes, who enrich our community, who give summer jobs to your kids, who finance the local Boy Scouts, who pay for the Little League and the hockey jerseys, and they're all gone. Amazon doesn't pay any local taxes. They pay not a dime in federal taxes either last year.
This is just something he just copied from Bernie's campaign. The Amazon thing. See, again, like I told you, when you're calling out corruption and you're talking about corporate power, it's easy to call out Amazon. Everybody knows about Amazon. It's easy to call out Jeff Bezos. Everybody knows about Jeff Bezos. When are you going to call out people like Larry Fink? When are you going to call out the billionaires that you're taking money from, like Bill Ackman and David Sachs? You're not going to call them out. They're your friends. Let's continue.
Time in federal taxes either last year. They're doing it right in front of us. They're ripping out the middle class in this country. If you like this.
They're ripping out the middle class in this country, but damn it, I'm running for president and I'm going to take that billionaire money. RFK Jr., like Marianne Williamson, is also writing a book. Don't fall for it, guys. Do not fall for this again. This is a joke. This guy is not, he's not a peace candidate. He is not a free speech candidate. RFK Jr. is in bed with billionaires, fucking hedge fund managers. And if you believe that he's going to look out for the best interest of the working class, you guys are playing yourself. People within those circles never turn on their own circle. Always remember that. Rich people always look out for each other, boo. Always. We are going to do call in tonight. We're going to do it. If you didn't do so, smash the like button. That helps me with the algo. I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be back and we're going to do call in. Thanks, Eric.
You got it. All right. How's everybody doing on this Tuesday? I am Eric T. Red. I usually help out in the background here, but then once in a while we give Sabrina a little break on these call-in nights where she takes a break and then we come back into the call-in. So call-in is where we want to hear what you got to say. I'm just searching up the call-in link, which we can put into the chat just to get that going. Sabrina will usually put it in as the pin chat. You can do call-in on your browser or your smartphone. Let's take a little preview of what the call-in is going to look like tonight. Let me bring that up. A little bit of scroll. Here we go. All right, tonight, call-in episode 134. That call-in is still going. Bad Cookie says, looking good in your Boston Red Sox red. Let me put that up there. Wait, where are we? I scrolled too much. I scrolled too little. There he is. Looking good in your Boston Red Sox red. Yeah, don't even talk to me about the Red Sox. We got Bruins and Celtics now. They're doing awesome. All right, call in Bernie remarks, Clyburn, and RFK. You can talk about that. You can talk about anything you want on the old call-in show. We like to hear what you got to say, and we'll be jumping into that shortly. But meanwhile, let's take a look at. We had a few chats come in here. Thanks for the super chat, John Freeze. If we had socialism, all the baby boomers could retire. Yep, definitely a good comment there, John. It's along the lines of we could all have nice things if we had a more socialist society. If it wasn't this cutthroat capitalism, it would. We'd have a better world for everyone, and maybe some billionaires wouldn't have more wealth than is even imaginable. And Robert here said about RFK Jr. He supports diminishing what constitutes protected speech, and I thought that was an on point, interesting comment. This is one of the ways that free speech gets attacked, is that you define up what, or define down what is. You define it down what is protected speech. So then all of a sudden saying free Palestine then gets translated into promoting terrorism, promoting violence. And so all of a sudden saying free Palestine isn't protected speech anymore. And it's part of that game they play. You definitely have to watch out for that. And Louise posted this a little while ago saying, Jimmy's interview with JFK was my heart's, sorry, she means RFK. Now, if Jimmy Dore had an interview with JFK, now that would be an episode that we'd all have to tune into. But I'll do a little correction for you, Louise. Jimmy's interview with RFK was my hard stop for RFK. I had heard other interviews and I was all yes. His anti-Palestinian rant was my hard stop. And, I think that was true for a lot of people who maybe, weren't really clued into what RFK was really about at first. And he certainly made it easy and obvious, in that interview as to what he was really about. And we had a comment, a paid comment from out on the Rockfins from Mr. Roger Meadows saying, And thanks for this, Roger. If we want women to not have to get abortions when time for some BIs to get $2,000 a week checks, that's $1,000 to go to the mom and $1,000 to go to the dad for each child they have, expiring when kid turns 21. Make remote work a fixture for moms staying home for their kids. Even if both parents are working, they still get the same check. I'm just running my screens here. They still get the same check. Saving parents on childcare. While we're at it, sorry, I'm just finding the right screen here. Here we go. Oh yeah. Oh, it is. Saving parents on childcare. While we're at it, try care for all. Thanks for that comment, Roger. Sorry if I butchered it a little bit, but I think we get the gist. Yeah, let me look at my notes here from today's. One of the things that I think I better highlight this one. I'm not sure what currency that is, but thanks for that super chat, super sticker, Blue Bay. Appreciate it. So when RFK's, you see how he's playing this game where he's talking about the money and talking about how we had this increase in billionaire wealth during the pandemic, and all that's certainly true. If we're talking about how I like to frame it as MCDS, right? Money, corruption, demand solutions. He got to the M, right? In the MCDS, but he didn't even get to the C, which is the corruption. And so, this is why it's not serious, because if he's really serious, he should be calling out all the current members of elected government at the federal level as corrupt. And so it's important to get to that, because that's a key issue with this. They are corrupt. They all need to be called out, whether you're talking about Biden or the Republicans or the squad. When it comes down to it, they are part of a corrupt party and a corrupt system. Then you get to the D, the demands. Right? What's the demand? Well, the demand is they not be corrupt. The demand is you stop the flow of money from the billionaires and the mega corporations to our government. That is like the root of the problem here. They are funneling the money and they're corrupting the whole system. And then you get to the solutions, which gets into exactly how you do that. You have to have the demand first, and then you get to the solution, which gets into you got to get the money out. You got to have public financing. You really have to have a constitutional fix to have real campaign finance reform and get the money out. And until you do that, it's not happening. And when you're not hearing a candidate talk about that, then you really have to wonder how serious they are. And speaking of the squad, one of the things I noticed was that, okay, all of a sudden you have the whole squad up here in Congress, and they're all very excited and very worked up. Well, what I see happening is one of their own is under threat, right? This is they're threatening Rashida Tlaib with being censured, and so that has got them all worked up, and it's kind of, I don't know. It just seems like that's really what they're most concerned about. They're not, you didn't see them up there before when, the bombing in Gaza started. You haven't seen them this excited when they first got in for force the vote, or for Medicare for all, which should be healthcare for all. You didn't see them get excited about those things, but when one of theirs is under threat, all of a sudden it's screaming and tears, and yeah.
Yep. That's how it is. Did we do Roger's comment?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
And we had this from this guy, but I'm not sure what currency that is. It looks like a big number.
I'm not sure what it is either. But thank you so much.
A lot, yeah. However much it is, thanks.
I also don't know if he meant to send a comment with that, because it was blank. Maybe he meant to send a comment. I don't know.
I think he just likes you.
Oh,
All right.
well, thank you. Thank you. We are going to move on over to calling, guys.
Oh, Bad Cookie says it's in rupees. Okay, but how much is that to the dollar? Come on, quick math.
And don't miss Thursday, guys. Thursday night, I have a double interview happening. We're gonna have Miko Palid is coming back, and he's gonna be with Dan Cohen. So we're gonna do a deep dive into Israel, Palestine. Don't miss that discussion. That is gonna be really good. It's great to have both of them at the same time. So should be a great show. And we're gonna head on over to call in now.
See you in there.
All right, guys, episode 134, Bernie remarks, Clyburn, RFK Censor, and more. Let's chat. We're going to do the damn thing. The link is pinned to the top of the chat in the comments. Let me just double check and make sure I did. Yes, I did. So I will see you guys over there. You know how we do this. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.